Chapter 1758. Why didn't you say so earlier? Josh held his throat as tears streamed down his face. He felt as if he had just drunk a mouthful of molten iron. The taste buds in his mouth exploded instantly, and his soul ascended to the heavens. Compared to the insanely spicy grilled fish, this insanely spicy hot pot soup was even more unbearable. It violently ravaged his mouth. Hot pot. It's supposed to be boiled. You didn't ask, and I didn't have time to tell you. Connie looked innocent as she quickly helped Josh up from the ground. She scooped another bowl of hot pot soup from the pot and handed it over. What are you doing? Josh, whose expression was still distorted due to the extreme spiciness, leaned back a little and stared at her. Fighting poison with poison, Connie said with an experienced expression. As long as you drink fast enough, the spiciness won't be able to catch up to you. You can even experience the special pleasure brought by the insanely spicy. Keep drinking, keep feeling good. Is it really that insanely spicy? Josh took the bowl of hot pot soup skeptically. He desperately wanted to relieve the spiciness in his mouth. Yes, it's that insanely spicy. Connie nodded affirmatively. Otherwise, how can it be called insanely spicy? Connie shouldn't be lying to me, Josh thought to himself. He tilted his head back and gulped down the hot pot soup. As he drank the soup, the burning sensation in his throat did subside. However, it was not because the fire was extinguished. Instead, it was suppressed by an even more intense spiciness. After the stacking, it brought about a sense of spiritual pleasure. How should he put it? It was like extreme pain, but also a little pleasure. This was indeed insanely spicy. Sweat trickled down Josh's cheeks, and his clothes were soon drenched, making him look rather disheveled. This is a werewolf. I didn't expect Edward's son to have some guts despite looking so gentle and weak. At that moment, the various representatives looked at Josh with admiration. If they were in his shoes, they would not have the courage to drink the first bowl. However, Josh had already started on the second bowl. This brat, Oster, who had just recovered a little, glared at Joshua. As the first person to drink the soup, he thought his contribution was enough to shock everyone. He did not expect Joshua to start drinking the second bowl. Patriarch, we can't let a brat from the human race overwhelm us, a clansman beside him whispered. Oster was also a little frustrated. The orcs had been fighting with the Roth Empire for many years. They didn't have much of an advantage on the battlefield, but they had never lost in terms of morale. Fill it up, Oster said straightforwardly. He picked up a bowl full of hot pot soup and gulped it down. Awesome. Meg, who was standing in the kitchen, couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. It was the first time he had seen 2 bowls of hot pot soup before eating. I often feel like I don't fit in with them because I'm not crazy enough. Connie took a sip of the soy milk she had just served to calm her nerves. On the other side, Josh had already finished his second bowl of soup. However, when he stopped, the burning sensation in his throat quickly surged up again. It was not any weaker than the first time. Another bowl? Vanessa asked as she looked at Joshua, who was clutching his throat. Josh nodded crazily. Vanessa quickly scooped another bowl for him. She clicked her tongue in wonder as she watched Josh drink from the bowl. I didn't expect Royal Brother to like spicy food so much. There will be someone to eat hot pot with me in the future. Again? Oster put down the bowl and looked at Josh, who had already started on his third bowl. He wanted to cry but had no tears. He picked up the third bowl of soup that his underling had scooped for him. Is this how hot pot is eaten? Lewis asked Jinx softly as he looked at the two of them drinking happily. Could it be a new way of eating? Jinx was also a little uncertain. He looked at the soup in front of him and hesitated if he should give it a try. The various representatives were in a dilemma. They wanted to drink it, but they could not bring themselves to do so. However, if they did not drink it, they would feel a little weak. Just then, Mia and the rest pushed out a dining cart filled with various ingredients. They stopped beside the various representatives and came with a hot pot guide. Guests, please refer to the hot pot guide when eating hot pot, Yabamiya reminded them warmly before leaving with a smile. Everyone picked up the guide and started reading it. The guide was simple and easy to understand. It clearly stated the method and time to cook each ingredient. As long as they followed the method written in the guide, they would be able to cook a delicious hot pot. So this is how hot pot is eaten. The various representatives were deep in thought as they solved the riddle in their hearts. However, when they looked at Josh and Oster, who had just put down their bowls, their expressions were filled with pity. Josh and Oster could not help but pick up the guide to take a look when they felt the gazes from the surroundings. Cough, cough. Oster started coughing violently. The feeling of choking on the insanely spicy soup was not a pleasant one. Josh's breathing also quickened. However, in order to protect the Empire's reputation, he could only force a smile. Drinking soup before eating is a tradition of our Empire. There's such a thing? Vanessa was a little surprised. Cough, cough. Josh also could not help but cough. The hot pot guide was already in their hands, but the various representatives' gazes were attracted by Dracula and Camilla, who were eating their steaks. Dracula had a knife in one hand and a fork in the other, and cut the steak into small pieces. The sharp steak knife slid across the beef, and the black pepper juice slowly seeped in along the knife's edge. The plump meat juice overflowed, and there were traces of hemoglobin in the meat. The alluring aroma of meat accompanied by the faint aroma of red wine slowly wafted over, making one salivate uncontrollably. This steak looks pretty good. Dracula picked up a piece of beef with his fork and put it into his mouth. With a gentle bite of his teeth, the fresh meat juice overflowed from the tender beef. The aroma of the black pepper was just right, and the wonderful taste danced on the tip of his tongue. In this delicious meat aroma, there was actually a sweet wine aroma hidden. It was like a sweet attack that made him sink into it all of a sudden. As an exquisite vampire and the most famous wine collector in the Boundless Sea realm, Dracula had an extraordinary understanding of wine. The best wine in the world was naturally the V-grade wine produced by the Buffett Winery. It was a good wine that couldn't be bought with money. Even with Dracula's status, he could only get a small bottle of it once in a while. However, the wine in this beef was even more mellow and delicious than the Buffett Winery's V-grade wine. And a wine of such quality was actually used as a condiment to cook the steak. This is really a waste of God's gift, Dracula lamented in his heart, but he had to admit that under the enhancement of the wine's aroma, the tender beef did indeed have richer layers. There was nothing to nitpick about, and it had completely overturned all of his expectations of beef. After swallowing a mouthful of beef, Dracula could not help but praise, so fragrant. Chapter 1759. Gulp. Many representatives couldn't help but swallow their saliva. They looked at Dracula's steak, then looked down at the insanely spicy hot pot in front of them. No matter how they looked at it, they felt like they had stepped on a landmine. On the other side, Sally held a wooden spoon and scooped a spoonful of rainbow-colored fried rice into her mouth. It's still a familiar taste. Sally's lips curled into a smile. The faint fragrance of the water of life lingered in the air, awakening her taste buds that had been asleep for a night. The delicate and refreshing texture, the delicious taste, and the rice that was neither hard nor soft. It didn't feel greasy at all when eaten for breakfast. After returning to the wind forest, she often thought of this Yangzhou fried rice. She didn't expect to be able to eat it again so soon, and it was at Mamie's. This feeling made her feel very touched. Elliot glanced at Sally, who was quietly eating her fried rice, and the fried rice in front of her. He wanted to say something, but hesitated. In the end, he chose to remain silent. Just as everyone was worrying about how to solve the hot pot problem, Vanessa was already happily cooking. First, she made a savory dipping sauce for herself. After removing the oil, she scooped half a spoonful of hot pot soup to add flavor. Then, she eagerly poured half a plate of spicy beef into the pot and picked up a duck intestine to rinse in the pot. As a regular at Mamie's hot pot area, Vanessa was already very familiar with the hot pot instructions. She strictly followed the instructions, and after rinsing the first duck intestine, she immediately left the boiling hot pot, dipped it in the dipping sauce, and put it into her mouth. The spicy and crispy duck intestine made a beautiful crisp sound in her teeth. Vanessa's eyebrows also relaxed. The perfect amount of spiciness gave her long-withered taste buds a timely rein. They started to recover and go crazy. Yes, this is the kind of spiciness Only Mamies can enjoy this kind of spiciness. Even after searching all over Rodu, Vanessa couldn't find a similar taste. She couldn't even find a spiciness that was close to it. Yes, compared to Mamie's hot pot, those chili peppers weren't crazy enough. Fine beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. She chewed the crispy duck intestine in her mouth and swallowed it. The tripe had already been prepared. The tripe covered in a layer of chili oil was taken out of the pot. Similarly, it was rolled in the dipping sauce and dipped in various dipping sauces before it was put into the mouth. The spicy soup exploded in her mouth, followed by the crispy tripe. It was as thin as a leaf, but it wasn't hard or chewy at all. Vanessa was enraptured by the wonderful experience brought about by the crispy texture. "I love hot pot." Vanessa couldn't help but praise from the bottom of her heart. She then scooped out the spicy beef from the pot and ate it with relish. Is that really the case? The representatives of the various races, who had been crying when they saw Oster and Josh, were now looking at Vanessa, who was enjoying the food, and were all confused. Could it be that she's playing us? The goblin representative turned his head and whispered to his companion beside him. "I don't think so. Usually, it's hard to eat something so disgusting that it tastes so good." His companion shook his head. "Forget it. Although it might be a little spicy, it shouldn't be a big problem." Louis swallowed his saliva. He also couldn't wait to pour the tripe and duck intestine beside him into the pot. Then, he controlled the tripe and duck intestine to move up and down in the pot, and started the hot pot's fast-forward mode. Soon, the duck intestine and tripe were ready. They floated quietly in front of Louis. Louis picked up his chopsticks and put the duck intestine into his mouth. This spiciness! Louis, who had experienced the baptism of medium spiciness, still couldn't help but shiver after experiencing the insanely spicy. His face was also flushed red. This spiciness was indeed not ordinary. This spiciness was a little crazy. Fortunately, he was mentally prepared and was also prepared. The moment the spiciness exploded in his mouth, he shut down the stress response caused by the various parts of his body to the taste. Because of that, when he was faced with the truly insanely spicy flavor, he did not fall to the ground in tears like Oster and Joshua did. After enduring the initial impact of the spicy flavor, his taste buds gradually regained their sense of taste. The crispy duck intestine was chewed in his mouth, and the wonderful taste began to appear. Compared to the medium spicy hot pot yesterday, this mouthful of duck intestine felt like the bitterness was over and the sweetness was coming. The taste also became more precious and delicious. However, after eating a piece of duck intestine, there was nothing left in his mouth, and his throat suddenly felt like it was on fire. Almost without thinking, Louis picked up a piece of tripe and put it into his mouth. The crispy tripe also brought joy to his teeth, and at the same time, suppressed the burning sensation in his throat. As long as I eat fast enough, the spiciness won't be able to catch up to me. Louis's eyes lit up. One chopstick after another, the tripe and duck intestine kept getting closer and closer to his mouth. At the same time, he did not forget to add all sorts of ingredients into the hot pot. As soon as he finished the duck intestine and tripe, the beef that was in the hot pot not long ago took his place. The spicy beef was already boiling in the hot pot, and the quail egg had already floated to the edge of the hot pot. Eating this insanely spicy is indeed a different experience. It's so good that I can't stop eating, Louis thought to himself. His hands and mouth did not dare to stop at all. One mouthful after another, he had no intention of stopping. Wow, this giant dragon uncle is an expert. Vanessa looked at Louis in amazement and praised him softly. She also wanted to experience the feeling of eating 10 pieces of duck intestine in a row. The various representatives watched Louis's impactful performance, and all of them could not help but want to try it out. It did not look that bad. Instead, it made them want to try it out. Dracula, who was eating steak, looked at Louis and Vanessa, who were enjoying their meal, and said softly, "Hot pot. Looks pretty good too. Have you forgotten how they jumped into the pit?" Camilla said calmly. "Air," Dracula said thoughtfully. "It seems to have been acted out by the two of them. Don't stand on ceremony, everyone. After breakfast, we still have serious matters to discuss," Michael said with a smile. Michael said with a smile as he soaked a deep-fried dough stick in the soy milk and took a bite. He was quite satisfied with the atmosphere. Because of the insanely spicy hot pot, the various representatives had forgotten to quarrel. Instead, they felt more like a community with a shared destiny. The various representatives then recalled that the boss had said that everyone would have to eat for an hour. According to the hot pot guide, if they wanted to eat their fill in an hour, they really could not waste any time. Duck intestine and tripe became the first choice for many people when they tried the hot pot for the first time. They used chopsticks to pick them up and put them in the hot pot. They wrapped them in a layer of red oil before putting them into their mouths. Roar, ah, fuck, fuck. Chapter 1760. The frost dragon spat fire. The abyss demon rolled all over the floor. The forest trolls pulled the grass off their heads, and the dwarves jumped up and knocked into the giants' knees. Chaotic and noisy voices rang out in the restaurant one after another. The representatives of the various races, who represented the face of the various races, were ultimately defeated in front of that insanely spicy mouthful. They were unable to protect their own faces. Yes, this taste, it's too insanely spicy. The disheveled representatives finally returned to their seats, and unfriendly gazes were directed at the kitchen. This bastard. Did he poison the food? Weston, the demon of destruction, said angrily with his swollen lips. The other representatives were also furious. The airs they put on in the morning were all smashed now. Grandpa Duckbill, don't spout nonsense. Father would never poison the food. You were the one who ordered the insanely spicy, but it wasn't insanely spicy enough. How can you blame others? Amy, who had been laughing behind the counter for a long time, said seriously. Grandpa Duckbill? Weston glared at Irina, and his anger rose. Her masters are Crassus and Julian, a tribesman reminded him softly. Weston's anger subsided. He forced a smile. It's all right. This nickname is quite good. Everyone, Mr. Mac is the best chef in Chaos City. He is also a very professional chef. I can guarantee that there is no problem with the food. Michael stood up and helplessly said, It's just that all of you are really brave to order the insanely spicy hot pot so early in the morning. After you get over the initial discomfort, you should be able to see the true meaning of deliciousness. I think you will regret it if you give up now. With Michael's endorsement and Chaos City's guarantee, the representatives finally gave up. Actually, no one thought that Chaos City would do anything to the food. It was just that after experiencing the insanely spicy, they still had some lingering fears. That duck intestine does taste pretty good. Even such a strong, spicy taste couldn't cover up its original taste. The crispness is even more amazing. It makes me want to have another one. The dwarf representative smacked his lips and said as if he hadn't had enough. He picked up 2 more duck intestines and put them into the pot to cook. Although it's a little spicy, the tripe does taste pretty good. It's a thin layer, but it's extra crispy. It's a little special. The goblin's representative nodded and poured the whole plate of tripe into the pot. He held a pair of chopsticks in each hand and used his amazing hand speed to give the tripe a second in the air. He repeated it 7 times, and then put them into his mouth piece by piece, and chewed contentedly. These chopsticks. The forest troll used 2 thick fingers to carefully pinch the chopsticks that weren't even as long as his fingers. After experimenting for a while, he directly put the chopsticks to the side. Out of nowhere, he took out a thin wooden skewer and skewered the meat and vegetables. Then, he put the skewers into the pot one by one. After waiting for a while, he grabbed the skewers and started eating. His enjoyment was no less than that of the people eating with chopsticks at the side. This is the creator of skewers? Meg watched from the kitchen and exclaimed, What a talent! Just like what Michael had said, after the initial discomfort, the various representatives gradually found the joy of hot pot and were completely conquered by the scrumptiousness of the hot pot. Ingredients that were simply cut and mixed were put into the pot according to the guide. When they were taken out, they became a delicacy. It was as magical as magic. Slurp! Josh ate the enoki mushrooms one mouthful after another and raised his eyebrows. Just like what Vanessa had said, as long as he didn't stop eating, His throat wouldn't be able to react to the spiciness. This perverted pleasure of being chased was really irresistible. The various representatives' resentment disappeared, and they gradually immersed themselves in the harmonious atmosphere of hot pot. Some of them even exchanged their favorite ingredients. Naturally, beer was a must for hot pot. The various representatives, who had been dominated by the spiciness for a long time, finally remembered that they could order something to drink, and beer naturally became their first choice. The large glass of beer with rich foam entered their throats, and the spiciness was instantly suppressed. That refreshing feeling was like being splashed with a bucket of ice water on a hot summer day. It was cool and refreshing. Awesome. Franklin gulped down a large mug of beer before turning to Yabamiya and saying, "Little girl, give me a large barrel of this beer. I don't feel like drinking it one small mug at a time." This. Yabamiya looked in the direction of the kitchen. A large barrel of beer cost a lot. Meg nodded slightly at Mia. "All right, please wait a moment." Yabamiya nodded slightly and turned to walk into the kitchen. "Disciple, give Master a barrel too." "This beer is really good," Lewis said. "I want a barrel too," Douglas said with a red face. Following that, the forest trolls and orcs all said that they wanted a large barrel of beer. Although Meg felt that it was not good to drink too much early in the morning, since the insanely spicy hot pot was served, there was no reason not to let them drink, so he satisfied all their requests. "Do we have to pay more?" Michael asked Dykus, who was beside him, softly as he looked at the various representatives gulping down beer from the barrels. "Mr. Mack didn't say, and we didn't dare to ask." Dykus shook his head and looked at the various representatives worriedly. He said softly, "I'm a little worried that the representatives will get drunk, and this is only breakfast." "Don't worry, they won't get drunk." Michael shook his head nonchalantly. Good wine and good food were served, and the atmosphere in the restaurant gradually became more harmonious. The tense atmosphere at the entrance of the restaurant was also more or less dispelled. After the 1-hour meal, the food carts beside the various representatives were basically emptied, and many people burped. "The meal is over. I wish everyone a smooth meeting." Meg smiled at everyone. The hot pot was removed, and everyone was served a cup of warm water. Meg led Mamie's heavenly team out officially. The restaurant was set aside for the meeting. Amy followed Meg out and curiously asked, "Father, aren't we going to have a meeting?" "Yes, we don't need to have a meeting. This is their business." Meg shook his head with a smile. He threw Ugly Duckling into the basket and got on the bicycle. "Let's go. I'll send you to play with Daphne. I have a lot of things to do today, so I might not have time to play with you." "Okay." Amy nodded obediently and climbed onto the bicycle's back seat. In the restaurant, the aroma of the hot pot gradually dissipated. The representatives leaned back in their chairs contentedly, enjoying the comfort and laziness after sweating profusely. At this moment, Michael stood up and smiled at the representatives present. "Everyone, we've had breakfast. It's time for us to get down to business." Chapter 1761. The various representatives became serious when they heard that. Because this breakfast was too impactful, it gave them a sense of satisfaction as if they had done something big. However, on second thought, they had only had breakfast, and the real meeting had yet to begin. As the representatives of their species, they bore the responsibility of fighting for the absolute benefits for their species, and even more so, they had to fight for their species' reputation in front of the various representatives. This meeting was a little rushed, but it had the support of the giant dragons and Chaos City as the host. Furthermore, it was held on the eve of the peace conference, so the various species attached great importance to it. However, the various species could only guess that this meeting had something to do with the peace conference. As for the specific content and what the giant dragons and Chaos City wanted to do, none of them knew. Joe sat up straight and retracted his gaze that he was sneaking glances at Irina. This was his first time representing the Empire to attend a meeting of this level. If his performance could satisfy the king, he would not be far from defeating Sean. Hence, he had to perform better. "I really want to go back to sleep." Vanessa leaned against the chair at the side and covered her mouth as she yawned. She was so excited about having hot pot that she couldn't sleep last night and woke up early this morning. Now that she had the hot pot, everything was perfect. When she heard that everyone was going to talk about serious matters, sleepiness hit her immediately, and her eyelids started to tremble. Michael, the peace conference is going to be officially held in a few days. Why can't we wait until the conference? Why do we have to hold this meeting a few days in advance? Oster asked, perplexed. The various representatives also looked at Michael. This was also a question that everyone couldn't understand. It's not that we're in a hurry. It's because time waits for no one, Michael said with a serious expression. 2 days ago, Chaos City and the Giant Dragons jointly sent out invitations to all the species to gather at Chaos City. We're in such a hurry because we have something to discuss. It concerns the survival of all the species on the Norland continent. The three of us drafted the joint application and sent it out together with Chaos City, Lewis said in a deep voice. Douglas and Franklin nodded slightly to show their acknowledgement of Lewis's words. The expressions of the representatives of the various races changed slightly. Could it be that the Nora continent was facing some kind of terrible disaster for the 3 giant dragons to treat it so seriously? Josh looked at Michael, Lewis, and the rest. These people could be said to be the top powerhouses on the Nora continent. The overall strength of the giant dragons could only be stronger than that of the Roth Empire. What exactly was the opponent that even they had to treat so seriously? Could it be? A certain possibility occurred to Josh, and a hint of panic flashed through his eyes. Irina was also examining Josh. She didn't notice him when she saw him from afar yesterday, but Josh's aura today made her feel a little strange. Irina and Joshua had known each other for many years, and they got along quite well. He was one of her few friends. However, she did not expect Joshua to lay his hands on Meg and Amy, and even lie to her after the incident, pretending to be kind and righteous to help her find them. She wanted nothing more than to take out a folding chair and smack him flat. However, when he saw Josh this time, he felt that he had become a little different. It was as if there was a hint of gloominess emanating from him. Could it be a psychological effect? Irina thought to herself doubtfully. She had considered the possibility of the devil, but the holy light didn't give her any guidance or hints. Michael said in a low voice, in the past 100 years, the Nora continent had achieved a rare peace because of the armistice agreement back then. The people of the various races were able to recuperate, and Chaos City was born because of that. It became a city formed by the people of the various races. As the third city lord of Chaos City, I am very grateful to the various races for abiding by the armistice agreement in the past 100 years. I am grateful to all of you for restraining yourselves and allowing the Nora continent to have a precious peace. However, the 100-year period is coming, and the armistice agreement signed by the various races back then is going to lose its effect. What will happen next might be the resumption of the racial war and countless deaths. Therefore, the first item of today's meeting is a proposal on behalf of Chaos City to the various races. I hope that the various races can renew the armistice agreement for another 100 years. The restaurant sank into silence. The various races' representatives sized each other up, but none of them were in a hurry to speak. Actually, the various races had already expected this. Chaos City's existence was very special. The armistice agreement was signed here, and the Bodai prison was built here to imprison a batch of extremely vicious war criminals. The first residents of Chaos City were the wardens and their families who were sent by the various races to guard the Bodai prison. Chaos City was the place where all the races converged. It could be said to be the center of the Nora continent. Its geographical location was very unique, and it was able to trade with all the races. It was also very tolerant, so it became a huge city with a population of over 1 million in just 100 years. All the races lived and thrived here, and lived in peace. The City Lord's castle and the Grey Temple that were set up in the early stages of the city's construction turned Chaos City from a chaotic and sinful place into the safest city on the Nora continent. It was also because of this that it attracted a group of like-minded powerhouses from various races, and allowed Chaos City to become a power that could establish itself on the Nora continent. Since it started with peace, it naturally wanted peace. This was in line with Chaos City's wishes, and also in line with the vision of the powers that were not powerful enough. Josh frowned when he heard that. He was summoned to the palace the night before he set off, and the king's instructions were still ringing in his ears. The Roth Empire was unprecedentedly strong after generations of hard work. How could they be willing to continue guarding that little territory? We vampires agree with Chief Michael's words. Peace. What a beautiful word. We no longer want to be bloodthirsty killers in the dark. Red wine is the new way of life, Dracula said with a smile as he swirled his red wine glass. Everyone looked at Dracula. This young ancestor of the vampires had already started to make decisions for the vampires? Huh. Dracula, can you represent the vampires? Weston the demon of destruction sneered. No matter what, I am one of the only two ancestors of the vampires, the youngest ancestor in history, and the future leader of the vampires. Is it that difficult to make a decision? Dracula said to Weston with a smile. You, on the other hand, are you Kakaba's stepping stone? Or Thelma's background wall? You. Weston's face flushed red instantly as he glared at Dracula. This cowardly vampires actually dared to talk back to him like that. The representatives who knew some inside information were already smiling. The demon of destruction was not weak among the demons. Among them, the great elder, Kakaba, was known as the demon with the most destructive power. The second elder, Thelma, had turned the tides many times in the demon of destruction's wars, and was also rather famous. In comparison, the third brother, Weston, was indeed reduced to a background wall, and had an awkward position in the demons. You don't have to say anything. Anyway, you can't make the decision on this matter, Dracula said with a smile. Maybe he wants to usurp the throne, Camilla said. Haha, he wouldn't dare even if he had 10 guts, Dracula said with disdain. You guys, you're infuriating me. Weston was fuming. The various representatives were secretly laughing at the side. They didn't expect the demons to have an internal conflict when the meeting had just started. Moreover, it wasn't the Abyss demons or the Flaming demons who started it. Chapter 1762. The confrontation between Weston and Dracula represented the attitudes of the two powerful tribes in the demon race. It was also a microcosm of the disunity within the demon race. The representatives of the Abyss demons and the Flaming demons glared at each other across the three big bosses, but none of them spoke. The war between the two tribes had yet to end, and they only sent 2 9th-tier demons to participate in the conference. The remaining 10th-tier demons didn't dare to leave the boundless sea realm easily. As for the representatives of the fear demons, they remained silent as if they didn't want to participate in the debate. Anyone could tell that the various tribes on the demon islands couldn't reach a consensus before the peace conference. Then, they wouldn't be able to form a powerful demon allied army. Under such circumstances, it would only be a joke if a certain demon tribe declared a racial war unilaterally. They might not even be able to defeat the goblins. We goblins agree with Chaos City's suggestion. Maintaining the current peace is a decision that will benefit all the tribes. War will only bring death and disaster, and won't bring any benefits to most of the tribes, the goblin representative said as he stood up to support Chaos City. As a tribe that wasn't strong enough, the goblins had suffered a huge blow in the last racial war. In the end, they relied on the numerous underground caverns that were easy to defend and hard to attack to survive until the end of the racial war, and gained a foothold on the Norland continent. The 100-year agreement was over, and the goblins, who couldn't protect themselves, were naturally very willing to work with Chaos City to gain more trump cards after receiving the olive branch from Chaos City. That was why they had the railway from Chaos City to the goblins' territory. We, the dwarves, also agree with Castellan Michael. We hope the peace treaty can continue. Castle has been defending this land for many years, and has maintained a neutral attitude towards all the tribes. We don't want to see another racial war, the dwarf representative said as he stood up. The dwarves were skilled in technology and had many craftsmen. They weren't good at fighting and didn't have enough combat troops. They only had the ability to protect themselves by closing Isen Castle. If the war continued for many years, no one could guarantee that Isen Castle would be invulnerable. It would be best if there was no war. Connie stood up and calmly said, the 72 tribes in the Falk tribe and the Orcs Anti-War Alliance also agree to continue the peace agreement and reject any new racial war. Everyone's gaze turned to Connie. This young chief of the Falk tribe was Isaiah's youngest daughter. Previously, She had received a lot of attention because she replaced Ferdinand as the new chief of the Falk tribe. The hairless monk, Rex, who was protecting her, allowed the Falk tribe, which had been on the decline due to the turmoil, to maintain their dignity as the second orc tribe. However, her age and ability did not seem to be on par with Oster. What right do you have to represent half of the orc tribes? Oster looked at Connie unkindly. Connie took out a letter of entrustment that was filled with signatures and said in a tone that was neither servile nor overbearing, "On the strength of this letter of entrustment signed by all the chiefs, on the strength of my identity as the chief of the Falk tribe, and on the strength of my conscience as an orc." Oster's expression was a little ugly as he said in a deep voice, "The Beastmen race is a whole. War or peace is not something you can decide." "Who's a whole with you? Did I agree?" Connie looked at Oster mockingly. "Put away your hypocritical words. You can have a war if you want, but don't think of dragging the other tribes down with you. We won't be joining you. You're indeed Isaiah's daughter." It's really rare to be able to match Oster's aura at such a young age. Douglas looked at Connie with admiration. "She's not bad." Lewis nodded in agreement. The various representatives also stopped looking at Connie with contempt. It was indeed not luck for a young lady to be able to return to the tribe to stage the return of the queen when her family was destroyed. Rex looked at Connie with 30% adoration and 70% satisfaction. Oster glanced at Rex, but eventually sat back down. The strength of the Beastmen race lay in the fact that countless tribes chose fearless Beastmen warriors to form the Beastmen army. However, if half of the Beastmen tribes were unwilling to participate in the war, the Beastmen race would have no advantage against the Roth Empire. They might even be crushed by the Roth Empire's cavalry and magic caster army. Damn, lass. Oster clenched his fists. There were still a few days before the peace conference. Connie had to die. The Night Elves support Chaos City's suggestion. Irina raised her hand and swept her gaze across the various representatives present. She coldly said, "Also, since everyone is here today, I'll add a few more words. If there are still any of my elves who are imprisoned here, they better send them to Chaos City obediently. If I have to go and fetch them myself, you can ask the Fear Demon's representatives how tragically they died on Bar Hill." All the representatives felt as if a knife had slid past their necks. They swallowed their saliva instinctively and at the same time, seriously considered going back to check on themselves. If Irina brought Alex to them, they would be in deep trouble. The Fear Demon's representatives at the side were furious, but they didn't dare to say anything. They really died tragically on Bar Hill. They would rather offend an entire race than offend this woman. Sally's eyes lit up as she looked at Irina. Her lips curled up slightly, but she quickly went back to normal. Elliot's expression was a little uncomfortable. The elves were roaming outside, but Irina was standing up for them now. It seemed like the elves had lost face. The giant dragons have already reached a consensus. The Dragon Island hopes that all the races can renew the peace treaty under the original framework to maintain the current state of peace and prevent another racial war, Lewis said in a low voice. "If anyone wants to fight, the Tyrannosaurus dragons are more than happy to oblige," Franklin said with a provocative smile. The restaurant suddenly became much quieter. Everyone could hear the threat in Lewis and Franklin's words. The giant dragon's forceful interference in the renewal of the peace treaty became something that all the races had to consider. Oster's eyes flickered. He was still full of fighting spirit when it came to the Roth Empire. However, if the Dragon Island and the Tyrannosaurus dragons were added into the mix, then the orcs wouldn't be able to bear it. The Forest Trolls representatives turned to look in the direction of the Roth Empire's representatives. They hesitated for a while and didn't rush to speak. Many representatives also looked at the representatives of the Roth Empire, the elves, and the Forest Trolls, who had yet to express their views. Now, only these three had yet to express their views. The elves have no intention of restarting the racial war. "We are willing to continue the peace treaty with all the other races and protect the peace." Sally stood up, and her ethereal voice sounded. "This?" Elliot looked at Sally in shock and almost jumped out of his chair. Chapter 1763. Elliot stared at Sally in disbelief. Before they left, Helena had reminded him not to make any promises easily if the peace treaty was brought up. It would depend on the Roth Empire's performance. Now, the Roth Empire and the Forest Trolls had yet to express their stance, but Sally actually expressed the elves' stance without discussing it with him. Sally was the elven race's new princess. After Irina led the Night Elves out of the Wind Forest, she became the best candidate for the next Elven Queen. Helena had asked her to lead the team to attend such an important meeting so that she could broaden her horizons and announce the new Elven princess to the outside world. Hence, she was naturally recognized as the Elven representative spokesperson and also represented the wishes of the Wind Forest. The representatives of the other races were not too surprised by the elves' choice. For the past 100 years, the elves had been well prepared, and their power had been rising steadily. They did indeed have the foundation of a strong race. However, all of this disappeared completely after the Elven Queen went into seclusion and Irina reappeared. She killed 3 10th-tier Elven powerhouses consecutively and led 30,000 Elven slaves and some Elven soldiers out of the Wind Forest. The elves now had to consider how to settle the increasingly unstable the Wind Forest and the Night Elves who had taken root in Chaos City and were gradually expanding their influence, instead of trying to get a share of the pie in the racial war. Josh also looked at Sally with surprise when he heard that. This was not something that should have happened in the plan. The Wind Forest should be on the same side as the Roth Empire. The Forest Trolls could not hide their surprise as well. War is cruel, but that does not mean that maintaining the status quo is right. Josh stood up and calmly said, "The Roth Empire has over 100 million citizens, which is more than the total population of the other 6 races. However, our territory is ranked 3rd from the bottom among the 8 major races. Furthermore, almost half of the land in the north is extremely cold and uninhabitable. Back then, the human race was weak and paid a terrible price to stand at the end of the racial war. When we signed the peace treaty to divide the land, we had no right to speak. Now that the 100-year agreement is up, our Roth Empire needs more land to settle our people. Therefore, we cannot accept the renewal of the peace agreement according to the original agreement." Josh had a scholarly appearance, but his words were powerful and resonant, displaying the aura that a prince of a powerful empire should possess. Big brother Joshua and father want to start a war? But from what he said, it seems quite reasonable. But if we start a war, many innocent soldiers will lose their lives, right? Vanessa, who was about to fall asleep, became more and more awake as she listened to everyone's arguments. However, after hearing Josh's words, she fell into deep worry again. She didn't want the Roth Empire to fall into war at all. The various representatives all had different expressions on their faces. After Franklin's harsh words, only the Roth Empire still dared to go against him. Furthermore, the invitation was very clear. They wanted to redivide the territories. "Andre, if we were to restart the racial war, how much territory do you think you'll be able to occupy?" Franklin asked Joshua. "If the giant dragons don't participate in the war, the Roth Empire will be unmatched," Josh said as he looked into Franklin's eyes. "What if the colossal dragon race joins the war? The Roth Empire and the colossal dragon race can split the world equally," Josh continued. There was an uproar in the restaurant instantly. This chap was looking down on the various races too much. The Roth Empire was getting stronger day by day, and this was something that all the races could see. Alex, who appeared out of nowhere, had completely overturned the stereotype of humans as weak and weak. Even so, no one felt that the Roth Empire was strong enough to go against the colossal dragon race. But today, the Roth Empire's second prince, Josh, actually boasted that the Roth Empire could defeat all the races and go against the colossal dragon race's equals. Arrogant brat. Oster was furious. He suddenly stood up and stared at Josh with his bull-like eyes as he mocked, "Your Roth Empire can't even cross the borders of the orcs. You've never really won a war at the borders, and you dare to say that you can conquer the entire continent? Perhaps you orcs call it a war, but to the Roth Empire's cavalry, it's just a training ground used to train our soldiers. The 10 military divisions rotate once a year." Josh looked at Oster with pity. "It's not that we can't cross it, but we look down on that barren piece of land." Oster's body swayed, and he staggered back to his seat as if he had suffered a huge blow. So every year, the Roth Empire's army would be weaker for a period of time. It's not because they're not used to the season, But because they're rotating new recruits? The orc at the side swallowed his saliva and felt a little lost. When the various races' representatives heard that, their expressions also became very serious. The border wars between the Roth Empire and the orcs had been going back and forth for many years, and both sides had won and lost. Therefore, the various races' assessment of the Roth Empire's combat power was that it was slightly stronger than the orcs, but it was far from being able to crush them. Thus, the various races did not pay enough attention and be on guard. No one would have thought that the Roth Empire's power would actually surpass the various races after secretly developing for 100 years. It was even close to the colossal dragon race. It really caught everyone off guard. The Forest Trolls representative stood up and said, "We, the Forest Trolls, also think that the previous division of the territory was unfair and cannot renew the peace agreement. We request to redivide the territory according to each race's power." The Forest Trolls were also very powerful. Although their population was not huge, they would have the power of the 5th tier when they reached adulthood. Their mid-tier and high-tier combat power was very shocking. The Roth Empire and the Forest Trolls. Even the giant dragons had to think carefully about how to deal with them. The situation that was originally good was also reversed at this moment. We, the elves. Elliot stood up anxiously. "Elliot, mind your status," Sally said coldly. Elliot choked on his words. He turned to Sally and anxiously said, "Sally, this is not something you can decide. High Priestess Helena, I don't care what the High Priestess said to you. I am the Princess of the Elves and also the leader of this representative team. My words represent the elves' attitude, and I have to be responsible for all my people," Sally said coldly. But Elliot still wanted to say something. "I order you to sit down and remain silent," Sally ordered expressionlessly as she flashed her identity token. "Why, you want to get us killed?" Elliot heaved a long sigh and sat back down heavily in his seat. "Good lad, you have some guts." Franklin looked at Josh again, and then closed his eyes in annoyance. He did not expect that the giant dragons would be threatened by humans one day. One had to know that the dragons had given them some protection in the past, and that was why they were not wiped out by the demons and orcs. "It's not guts, it's confidence," Josh said calmly. He raised his eyebrows proudly. "There will be no suspense about the outcome of the war. We will get what we want." The confidence that the Empire's soldiers exchanged with their blood and lives is not for the royal family to exchange for war. Right at this moment, the restaurant's door suddenly opened, and a figure carrying a heavy sword on his back walked in. Chapter 1764. Everyone turned to look at the entrance of the restaurant. "Alex!" Weston stood up from his chair in shock. The various representatives couldn't hide their shock either. Although Alex had returned from the battle in Rodu a few months ago, he hadn't shown himself in front of anyone. His whereabouts were mysterious and hard to track. They were still wondering why Alex wasn't here today, and didn't expect him to appear at this moment. Josh's body was a little stiff as he turned to look at Alex, who was walking in. His expression was a little unnatural, and his gaze was a little evasive. Richard also stood up cautiously and held his magic caster's staff as he stood beside Josh to protect him. In close combat, Alex was undoubtedly the scariest opponent. No one could block his sword within 2 meters, let alone a magic caster. "You haven't changed at all after so many years," Dracula said to Alex in amazement. "Uncle, can you beat him now?" Camilla asked curiously. "No," Dracula said honestly. "But you're the ancestor now?" Benson was still chopped in half. Dracula shrugged and helplessly said, "Some people are born unreasonable. You're really a coward." Camilla nodded and glanced at Irina. She was the same. "Is this big sister Irina's man? He's so handsome." Connie couldn't help but look at him with stars in her eyes. She had heard about Alex's legends since she was young. Even though the orcs didn't have a good relationship with the Roth Empire, it didn't affect their respect for Alex at all. Her father had said before that he was a human and opponent worthy of respect. However, her gaze was quickly attracted by the figure in Alex's hand. "That's brother?" Connie bit her lip. Irina had already mentioned this to her yesterday. Ferdinand wasn't dead, but he would appear at today's meeting as an important witness to the existence of the devil. However, Seeing him again after so many months, Connie still couldn't bear to look at the skinny Ferdinand. Ferdinand? Isn't he dead? Oster was shocked as well. That was because Irina had used the holy light to evolve Ferdinand, who had turned into a demon, causing his plan to fail. He had thought that Ferdinand was dead, but he did not expect to see him here again. Alex, long time no see. Josh's voice was a little hoarse as he looked at Alex. He tried his best to squeeze out a smile, but he was unable to do so. Even though 3 years had passed and the man he had once smashed down from the sky appeared in front of him again, he still felt an incomparably huge pressure. Meg casually tossed Ferdinand to the ground and calmly said to Joshua, "You were too arrogant for not killing me back then. Perhaps this is a misunderstanding." Josh could sense the killing intent, and he reflexively took half a step back. His throat was so dry that he could barely make a sound. Heh, misunderstanding? Mag chuckled. Did this second prince really have a sense of humor? Yes. We can resolve this misunderstanding anytime. You are the Empire's general, and the Empire needs you now. Josh quickly adjusted his attitude and stood up straight again. He looked at Meg warily and said, "Father said that as long as you are willing to return, you will be the Roth Empire's marshal. You will be second only to one and above everyone else." Meg looked at Josh, who had calmed down. This second prince was indeed a scheming person. His mental fortitude was much stronger than Sean's. He could even use the word misunderstanding to brush off such a life-or-death feud and talk about recruitment in the blink of an eye. The various representatives had their own agendas. The representatives who had participated in the ambush on the rainy night back then were all averting their gazes, afraid of going up against Alex. It would not end well for them to provoke this god of death. "Don't worry. I won't kill you today." Meg looked at Josh mockingly before turning to Michael. "City Lord Michael, I have brought him to you." Josh heaved a sigh of relief secretly. Only then did he realize that his back and palms were already drenched in sweat. When he realized the fear he had for Alex from the bottom of his heart, anger rose in his heart again. If not for the fact that he couldn't defeat him, why would he, the second prince of the Roth Empire, be in such a state? This fellow? However, before Josh could think further, his gaze was already attracted by Ferdinand, who was lying on the ground. A demonic red light flashed past his eyes. It's a familiar aura. Could he also be? Irina narrowed her eyes and looked at Josh. In that instant, she seemed to have sensed a trace of demonic aura. However, Ferdinand was lying beside Josh, so perhaps the demonic aura on him had yet to dissipate. This is? The various representatives looked at the skinny youth lying on the ground doubtfully. Who was this person that Alex was escorting personally? "Thank you for your trouble." Michael nodded. He stood up and loudly said, "Dear representatives, I have invited all of you here today not only to discuss the continuation of the peace agreement, but also to inform all of you of a critical matter that concerns the survival of all of our races. The Roth Empire and the Forest Trolls might have their own ideas, but what the various races of the Norland continent need to urgently face now is not the redistribution of territories, but a group of terrifying existences." Josh's eyes darted around rapidly. He retracted his gaze from Ferdinand, but his heart was filled with panic. He was sure that this person on the ground had gotten that thing like him. But why did he become like this? And why did he appear in such an occasion? Terrifying existences? What is that? The dwarf representative asked loudly. Everyone was also looking at Michael in confusion. The representatives sent by all the powerful races of the Norland continent were all here. The 3 big shots of the giant dragons were also sitting here. What else could be considered a terrifying existence to them? It's the devil. A group of devils that have survived from ancient times until now. Or you can call them the Great Old Ones. They have powerful abilities, unkillable vitality, and the terrifying ability to bewitch people, Michael said. Devils? The various representatives were confused and in disbelief. The devils bewitch living beings to offer them their souls, and then control them to kill each other, turning the world into a purgatory. Michael looked at everyone and calmly said, "I know that all of you might not be able to accept this in a short period of time, so I asked Alex to bring this young man who offered his soul to the devil today. He is Ferdinand, the son of Isaiah of the Fok tribe. Just over a month ago at the conferring ceremony, Irina used the holy light to expose him on the spot. He exchanged his soul with the devil and was purified by the holy light. Chief Oster and Chief Connie were also present at that time and can be witnesses. All the representatives looked at Connie and Oster after hearing that. This explosive news was already a little beyond what they could accept. He was once my closest brother, but he was bewitched by the devil to kill all my relatives, including himself. Connie took out the diary left behind by her grandmother with a sorrowful expression. My grandmother had already guessed this, but she was murdered. The devil killed them. Although Oster was unhappy that Irina ruined his plan that day, Ferdinand's strange behavior did make him shudder when he recalled it. He hesitated for a while and nodded. I was indeed present that day. Ferdinand's behavior was not like a normal orc, and he did have a terrifying aura. Not only was he powerful, but he was also as gloomy as a bottomless abyss. The Devil King will come eventually. All of you have to die. All of you have to die. Ferdinand, who was lying on the ground, suddenly twisted and tried to stand up. The abyss roared with a hoarse voice. His blood-red eyes were glowing with a deathly glow, and he was kicked back to the ground by Meg. Ferdinand's strange behavior, as well as Connie and Oster's testimonies, made all the representatives present feel as if they had fallen into an ice cave. A terrifying existence was suddenly thrown in front of them. Perhaps he was just triggered by something. We have to bury a few lunatics like him every year, the goblin's representative probed. Everyone's eyes lit up. They couldn't rule out that possibility. I know everyone might not believe it, so I invited the hairless monk back to tell everyone what exactly happened to the Urba tribe's tragedy 100 years ago. Michael looked at Rex. The Urba tribe's tragedy shocked everyone back then. Many people present knew about it, and some even went to the scene to check it out. They still felt nauseous when they recalled it now. This tragedy back then was eventually attributed to the hairless monk's revenge massacre. However, there were many suspicious points, so Rex was locked up in the Badai prison. They heard that he left the Badai prison some time ago and became the master of the new chief of the Fok tribe. That night, I went to the Urba tribe to take revenge for how they bullied my mother and me back then. However, I only wanted to teach a lesson to a few people who left a deep impression on me. But when I reached the tribe, Rex described what he saw that night in a low voice. The strange sacrificial ceremony, the frenzied orcs of the Urba tribe, biting and killing each other. Those terrifying scenes appeared in everyone's minds through Rex's description. Everyone's faces turned pale, and they trembled in fear. Some of the representatives who had been to the Urba tribe's tragedy scene couldn't help but cover their mouths and retch. They finally understood how those strange corpses and wounds came about. It wasn't a one-sided massacre, but a chaotic and frenzied biting each other. Any race with intelligence wouldn't be able to do such a terrifying thing. The devil bewitched them, and then made them kill themselves. Rex ended his description calmly. A drop of cold sweat slid down his cheek. It could be seen that he wasn't calm on the inside from the way his veins were popping out from clenching his fists too tightly. There was dead silence in the restaurant. Everyone had panic written all over their faces. I don't know if we are lucky or unlucky. We found the sealed devil, but the seal is about to lose its effect. Michael said solemnly. End of chapter. Chapter 1765. The restaurant was silent, and the expressions of the representatives were somewhat shocked. They had yet to recover from Rex's strange and terrifying description of the Urba tribe's tragedy, and were frightened by Michael's words about the devil breaking out of the seal. The various representatives present were the representatives of the most powerful forces on the Norland continent. However, an even more powerful and terrifying existence had appeared above them. They were bloodthirsty and cruel, and had lived for countless years. They were powerful and terrifying. Apart from shock, Josh was also a little flustered. Are you the devil they're talking about? What exactly are you? Do you really want to destroy this world? Josh screamed in his heart, but that voice didn't give him a reply. That made his emotions even more chaotic. The statue he got came from the Urba tribe, and Rex's description made his hair stand on end. Although he hadn't completely handed over his soul to that fellow, they were almost in the same boat now. Could it be that there's something wrong with my senses? Irina stared at Josh with furrowed brows in confusion. She seemed to have sensed a trace of demonic aura from Josh, but she couldn't find anything when she checked carefully. Is there really a devil? Camilla whispered. What the hell is that? Dracula frowned too. It sounds very powerful. We are vampires, and ghosts too. We can't be frightened so easily, Dracula said calmly. City Lord Michael, you said you found the sealed devil. Where is that devil now? Can you bring us there to take a look? Richard asked with a serious expression as he stood up. As one of the representatives from the Roth Empire, Richard had the responsibility of assisting Josh. Josh had already laid out the Empire's cards and was about to discuss the conditions that were most beneficial to the Empire with the various races, but Michael threw out the devil's words at this time. Yes, words are no proof. The history of the elves has never recorded the existence of any devil, Elliot chimed in. He was also in disbelief. The various representatives slowly came back to their senses and looked at Michael in confusion. So many years had passed, and the various races had never heard of the existence of devils. Why would they suddenly appear? The sealed devil was discovered by Crassus and Julian. Because the seal was damaged, the devil's aura leaked out and was discovered. Michael explained, at the moment, they are still guarding the seal, trying to repair the seal and reseal the devil. However, the situation is not optimistic. The seal formation is too ancient, and analyzing the formation has become a big problem. Lewis and I went to the sealed land a few days ago. That fellow's power is far beyond our imagination. Once it escapes from the seal, it will be a terrible disaster for the Norland continent, Douglas said in a low voice with a grave expression. Lewis also said solemnly, although it's a little embarrassing, I still have to let you guys know how powerful it is. If it weren't for Crassus, Julian, Douglas, and Novan joining forces to save me, and the seal stopping it, I would have been killed by that fellow. Everyone was in an uproar, and they were once again filled with fear. Lewis was a very powerful being. He was one of the top 5 big shots on the Norland continent, but he was almost killed by the devil in the seal. Furthermore, he only managed to escape with the help of 4 10th-tier powerhouses. One could only imagine how terrifying that devil's power was. Richard's expression also changed slightly. His power was not even comparable to Crassus, let alone Lewis. If that devil was really as powerful as Lewis and the rest described, it would be a terrible threat to the Roth Empire, and not beneficial to His Majesty's plan to unify the world. With the help of Crassus and the rest, I once chopped off one of its tentacles. However, this was not even a small injury to it. It grew another tentacle in the blink of an eye. Meg threw out half of the frozen octopus tentacle. Everyone looked at that tentacle. The blood-red eyeball that was covered with tentacles was still very lifelike. Just looking at it was enough to make one feel terrified. What made everyone even more concerned was that Alex, who was said to be the strongest in close combat on the Norland continent, could only chop off one of that devil's tentacles with the help of Crassus and the rest. However, its terrifying regenerative ability could erase this kind of damage directly. It was chilling. Isn't this invincible? Connie swallowed her saliva and inched closer to Rex. Extremely difficult to deal with. Rex nodded with a grave expression. Invincible? Josh looked at Alex, and a red light suddenly flashed across his eyes. He clenched his fists subconsciously. Alex, who was almost invincible in his eyes, also had an opponent that he could not deal with at all. However, he had the chance to obtain the help of that existence. When it comes out of the seal, you will gain an extremely powerful friend. The familiar voice sounded in his mind again, and it was filled with bewitchment. Josh's lips began to curl up, and his hands that were hanging by his side trembled slightly. This fellow is indeed tainted with the demonic aura. Perhaps he has already exchanged souls with the devil? Irina narrowed her eyes. In that instant, she could clearly feel the demonic aura emanating from Josh's body. This meant that he might have exchanged souls with the devil, or he might have interacted with the devil before. That was because his situation was a little special. Compared to Borg, Alfred, and Ferdinand, who was lying on the ground, The demonic aura on Joshua was extremely faint. He did not show any signs of madness after being bewitched by the devil. Instead, he looked excessively normal. Therefore, she could not determine his situation at the moment. However, what she could be sure of was that he must have interacted with the devil before, and that was why he was tainted with the demonic aura. The two big bosses of the dragon tribe and Alex spoke one after another, which was equivalent to determining the nature of this matter. Given their status, they would not join forces to deceive the other races. Moreover, Crassus and the rest were also involved. There was no force that could make them so unified. Richard looked at Michael and said, "City Lord Michael, since you have discovered the sealed land, can you bring us there to check it out? If what you said is true, and this matter concerns the safety of all the races on the Norland continent, we should also do our part." Words were not proof, and this matter might affect the king's decision. He had to see that so-called devil with his own eyes before he could report this matter to the king. The various representatives agreed. Although Alex and the rest had endorsed them, the devil's words were still beyond their knowledge. They would not believe it if they did not see it for themselves. Michael nodded and said, "This matter is not something that Chaos City and the Dragon Tribe can solve alone. We urgently invited all the representatives here, and because of this, we have set up a teleportation portal in the Aiden Square that leads directly to the sealed land. Representatives, please come with me. Since this matter concerns all the races on the Norland continent, then we, Lantist, should also do our part." Right at this moment, a voice sounded outside the restaurant. The restaurant's door opened, and 10 merfolk powerhouses in silver armor stood at the door. Chapter 1766. Who are they? Everyone in the restaurant turned to look at the uninvited guests at the door in shock. The other party had 10 people, and all of them were 10th-tier powerhouses. The number of 10th-tier powerhouses was even more than the goblins and dwarves. All the races had sent their representatives, so who exactly were these powerhouses who claimed to be from Lantist? Michael also looked at the people at the door in shock, and instinctively looked at Meg. Outside of the major races, it was extremely difficult to assemble a team of 10 level 10 powerhouses. Moreover, there was not a single powerhouse among them that was well known to the public. 10th-tier powerhouses were the top existences on the Norland continent. Even the powerful giant dragons only had 30 to 40 10th-tier giant dragons. The Roth Empire relied on its huge population, and the Magus Tower and the Empire's Knight Academy spared no effort in nurturing them. The number of 10th-tier powerhouses was only similar to that of the giant dragons. A race with 10 10th-tier powerhouses was enough to have a place on the Norland continent. Elliot looked at the people at the door and couldn't help but exclaim, "Aren't they that group of mysterious powerhouses who appeared at the goblins' borders?" Although they weren't wearing black uniforms today, their auras were the same. The battle at the underground cavern at the goblins' borders was a disgrace to the elves. The Wind Forest had sent out almost all of its elite troops and top powerhouses to besiege thousands of night elves, but it ended in defeat, and the elven marshal, Borg, died in battle. And what changed the outcome of this battle, which had no suspense at all, was the sudden appearance of a group of mysterious powerhouses who forcefully stopped the elves' attack and forced them to retreat. It was known in history as the Incident of the Thugs in Suits. After their defeat, the Night Elves went south to build a stronghold in Chaos City and triggered the slave revolt that had a greater impact on the elves. It could be said that if it wasn't for this group of mysterious powerhouses, Irina and the Night Elves would have been killed in the underground cavern at the goblins' borders, and the elves would have the power to fight for supremacy now. Of course, if it wasn't for this group of powerhouses, Borg might not have died, and he wouldn't have the right to sit here. The representatives of the various races looked at the people at the door in shock when they heard Elliot blurting out those words. Back then, the elves had lost the battle due to the huge disparity in power, but it had caused a sensation on the Norland continent. The identity of that group of mysterious experts had also become an unsolved mystery. To this day, no one knew. Today, it seemed that all of this would be revealed. The sudden emergence of a power with 10 10th-tier powerhouses was going to have a huge impact on the Norland continent. If they stood on the anti-war side, even the powerful Roth Empire would have to reconsider the feasibility of conquering the entire continent. Dexter led the powerhouses of Lantis through the door and stopped at the entrance. He didn't take any further action as he looked at Meg. Everyone subconsciously looked at Meg. The last time this group of mysterious powerhouses appeared was to rescue Irina and the Night Elves. At that time, Alex was also present. What was the relationship between them? I am Michael, the City Lord of Chaos City. May I know which race you are from? As the host, Michael had to understand this group of mysterious powerhouses that had suddenly appeared. Dexter didn't answer. Instead, he said something to Meg and Lantis. Meg nodded slightly. He turned to look at Michael and said, "They are the people of Lantis. They came from the bottom of the boundless sea realm and have been living under the sea for the past thousands of years. Now, they want to build a friendly relationship with the other races, so they asked me to bring them to this meeting." Under the boundless sea realm? The representatives of the demon race were all shocked. Who would have thought that there was such a powerful race living under the boundless sea realm? So, for the past thousands of years, we have been living on the island, and they have been living under the sea. They actually lived peacefully for so many years? Dracula said in shock. Maybe they don't want to go ashore, Camilla said calmly. The other representatives of the other races also had different expressions. According to Alex, Lantis should be a sizable race. They must have many powerhouses to be able to defeat the elven elites head-on. After Alex left the Roth Empire, he was almost alone. Irina's night elves were still young, and 30,000 elven slaves couldn't bring about significant combat power in a short period of time. No matter how powerful he was, he couldn't change the situation of the Norland continent. However, if this Lantis that had more than 10 10th-tier powerhouses stood on his side, the outcome would be completely different. Nobody knew how powerful Lantis was, and nobody knew how many powerhouses and tribesmen were hiding under the sea. The unknown was the most frightening. I see. Michael was deep in thought. Chaos City was also paying attention to that group of mysterious powerhouses at the Goblins' border. He even asked Irina alone, but he didn't get any useful information. However, since Alex asked them to appear at this time, he must have the confidence to get them to stand on his side. It must be a good thing for the peace camp. Michael nodded and said, "What we are discussing today concerns the future of all the races on the Norland continent. As one of the powers and races on the Norland continent, it would naturally be best if Lantis could live in peace with all the other races and participate in the battle against the devils." Meg conveyed Michael's words to Dexter. Dexter nodded solemnly and said, "This concerns all the living beings on the Norland continent. We, Lantis, cannot stay out of this. We will definitely do our best for this." Meg conveyed Dexter's words and explained, "Lantis has never established contact with the land before, so they don't understand the common language. I can only convey it." "All right. In that case, we will go to the sealed land first. The situation of the seal is very serious now, and we urgently need the help of all the races." Michael nodded and walked out of the door first. Everyone followed suit. If such a terrifying devil really existed, Lantis' entry into the world would be a powerful helper for them. It was a good thing. "I found demonic aura on Josh. There might be something wrong with him." Meg heard Irina's voice transmission at the door. Meg looked at Josh with a hint of surprise in his eyes. Given his status, why would he want to get involved with the devil when he and Sean's fight for the throne had yet to be decided? "I will keep an eye on him. Once he tries to break the seal, we will be able to prove that he is under the devil's control," Irina continued. Meg nodded slightly. He was on high alert. If the seal was broken, not many people present would be able to escape. Chapter 1767. The temporary teleportation portal was located near the Bodai prison in the Aden Square. The various representatives walked out of the restaurant under Michael's lead and quickly stepped into a spell formation guarded by the Grey Temple Knights. Dozens of representatives stood in the spell formation with solemn expressions, and some uneasiness could be seen on their faces. The negotiations for the renewal of the peace agreement did not go smoothly, and the terrifying devil was like a wake-up call that caught the various representatives off guard. As for the sudden appearance of Lantis, it was still unknown what kind of role they would play on the Norland continent, but their appearance had already ruined all the plans of the various races. "Vanessa, wait for us here," Josh said to Vanessa as he looked at her outside the spell formation. Can I not go? Vanessa asked worriedly as she glanced at the various representatives who had entered the spell formation. Josh nodded and said, there might be unknown dangers. I might not be able to protect you. Just wait for us to come back in the restaurant. All right, Vanessa nodded. Then, she looked at Josh with concern and said, then, big brother Josh, you have to protect yourself. I will wait for you to come back. All right. Josh nodded with a smile and stepped into the spell formation. The various representatives had all entered the teleportation portal. Michael nodded at the spell formation master at the side, and the latter activated the spell formation. A faint golden light shone from the runes on the ground, and everyone disappeared on the spot. Then, they appeared in the underground cave in an instant. What is this? The golden light faded, and a huge mural appeared in front of everyone. The horrifying scene in the mural shocked the various representatives. The huge and terrifying indescribable creature in the middle of the mural, and the various races who had fallen into madness, made them subconsciously think of the tragedy of the Urba tribe that Rex had described. Fear shrouded everyone present. That bone-piercing chill was indescribable. What made the elves kill their own people? What made the giant dragons kill each other? What made them fall into madness? The answer might be that terrifying, indescribable creature. Its huge body and tentacles that were filled with eyeballs made even the demons shudder. Master, are you all right? Connie grabbed Rex's sleeve fearfully. When she looked up, she realized that Rex's face was pale, and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. I'm fine. Lex shook her head and shifted her gaze away from the mural. She said with lingering fear, back then, I saw the shadow of this object in the sky above the Urba tribe. When the various representatives heard this, their expressions turned even uglier. Could it be that the demon in the seal was the instigator of the tragedy of the Urba tribe back then? Josh looked at the mural with a worried and conflicted expression. Your Highness, we have to report this to His Majesty as soon as possible. Richard transmitted his voice to Josh, and there was a hint of fear in his voice. Joshua ignored him and continued to stare at the massive, indescribable object. Find an opportunity to release him, and you will gain an unparalleled friend. Everyone here will die, and the Norland continent will be ours. We will dominate everything. A seductive voice sounded in his ears, but he was hesitating. After seeing the mural, the determination that he had made countless times was shaken. This seems to be different from what we agreed on, Josh said as calmly as he could in his heart. If you want to obtain power and power, you have to pay a price. They're just some people used as sacrifices. Death is the best ending for them, and you're the one we've chosen. You'll become our spokesperson, and you can do whatever you want. Don't you want to kill that man? As long as you release him, he can help you kill him easily. And that elf, what a cute little beauty. As long as you are willing, she will be yours. Josh looked up at Alex and Irina. He clenched his fists with a complicated expression and did not agree to that voice. Michael stood in front of the mural and solemnly said to everyone, everyone, behind this mural is the sealed land. Although that devil is sealed in the spell formation, it can still control and attack people outside the spell formation with its mental power. So, after entering the cave, please do not go near the sealing spell formation. Do not stare at its eyes, and do not try to enter the spell formation to attack it. The various representatives nodded in agreement. After going through so much, everyone no longer underestimated this mural when they saw it again. They were all on high alert, afraid that they would fall into the devil's trap. Michael then turned to activate the switch on the stone door. Everyone looked nervously at the stone door that was slowly opening to the side. A sinister aura surged out crazily from the gap of the door. The magic caster took out his magic caster's staff and silently recited the spell for a protective barrier. The dwarves had shields in their hands at some point, and the goblins were consciously moving behind them. Dracula had already spread his wings and was standing half a step in front of Camilla, shielding her behind him. Richard and a knight were also guarding Josh's sides and looked at the stone door that was slowly opening with vigilance. The huge psychological pressure made the various representatives use their strongest life-saving means. Although Michael repeatedly emphasized that the devil was still sealed, he also told them that even if it was sealed, it could still attack them. Hurry up, I've waited until the flowers wilted. Ace, can't afford it. Ace bomb, I'm a farmer. We're all farmers. You're using an ace bomb at the start of the game? I've never used an ace bomb in my life. Also, I don't know how to farm. All right, you're the boss. The stone door slowly opened, and what everyone saw was not that terrifying, indescribable thing, but the trio of Crassus, Julian, and Barbara sitting in front of the stone door, warming themselves by the fire and playing cards. The moment the stone door opened, the various representatives outside looked at each other with nervous expressions, and the trio sitting on the ground with cards in their hands. The atmosphere was a little strange. Meg's mouth twitched, and he forced himself not to laugh. Can't afford it. After a while, Barbara came back to her senses and said, Can't afford it. Crassus followed. 4 twos. Julian continued to calmly throw his cards. The scene that they saw after the door opened was a little different from what the various representatives had imagined. Looking at Crassus and Julian sitting on the ground and playing cards with a little girl, they even felt that it was ridiculous. Even the terrifying atmosphere that made one's heart turn cold was somewhat destroyed at this moment. However, in the next moment, an ear-piercing scream rang through the cave. Chapter 1768. Although the scene after the door opened gave the representatives a sense of absurdity, it didn't stop them from paying attention to the terrifying, indescribable thing in the middle of the huge cave that was close to 1,000 meters tall. It was almost identical to the head of the indescribable thing in the mural. Countless tentacles extended out from a pile of flesh that looked like mud, and on those tentacles and flesh were scarlet eyeballs. They were densely packed and shone with a demonic red light that filled the entire sealed space. The moment they stepped through the stone door, everyone felt as if they were being watched. That intense sense of fear made their scalps go numb, and the terrifying aura that rushed towards them made them feel as if they were facing an ancient, ferocious beast. Dexter and the powerhouses of Lantis looked at that indescribable thing with a fearful expression. It turned out that there was an even more terrifying existence above the 10th tier. This was undoubtedly a huge shock to Lantis, who had lived in the deep sea for a long time. Meanwhile, that indescribable thing seemed to be enraged by the sudden appearance of the crowd. It let out a low, ear-piercing roar, and countless tentacles slammed towards the entrance of the cave. This scene made the representatives of the various races turn pale with fright. They stepped back instinctively, and at the same time, each of them took out their life-saving measures, afraid that they would be killed by that monster in a second. Only the 3 people who were still playing landlord at the side remained calm. You are too good at playing cards, Crassus said to Julian with a chuckle as he successfully played the last card. Boring thing. Julian placed the cards in his hand on the table, and the poker cards turned into dust together with the small square table. You are a little incompetent and furious. Crassus kept the money he won happily. I don't want to be a farmer anymore, Barbara said angrily as she threw the cards in her hand away. The representatives of the various races felt that the 3 of them didn't know what was good for them, but they couldn't help but want to laugh. How big of a heart did they have to be to play games around a bonfire in such a place? Bam! Countless tentacles slammed onto that light golden seal, and the seal that was already in a precarious situation became even worse. The barrier was almost transparent. Fortunately, the seal was still able to withstand the attack of the indescribable object. Accompanied by a series of corrosive sounds, the impact on the seal ended with hundreds of tentacles melting away. Only then did the various representatives, who had almost exited the cave, stop in their tracks. They looked at the flickering barrier with lingering fear. If this barrier had not withstood this attack, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Its tentacles are recovering quickly, Elliot exclaimed. Everyone looked over and saw that the tentacles that the indescribable creature had severed from attacking the seal were recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye. In just a few breaths of time, all the severed limbs had grown back, looking no different from before. What a terrifying recovery ability! The expressions of the various representatives were very solemn. This proved that what Alex had said before was not false. This octopus monster had a desperate recovery ability. So powerful. Josh was also unable to conceal the astonishment in his eyes. The aura of this indescribable being was far more oppressive than that of a 10th-tier powerhouse. It was an existence on a completely different level. People could only look up to it and fear it. Meanwhile, its terrifying recovery ability made it almost invincible. With its huge body and countless tentacles, even though it was trapped in the seal, it still looked invincible as it looked down on everyone outside the seal. There's actually such a monster in this world. Franklin, the Tyrannosaurus Rex, also had an ugly expression. Although he had already heard some news from Lewis and Douglas, he only knew how difficult it was to deal with after seeing this indescribable being with his own eyes. Look at your cowardly faces. If this fellow could escape now, would we still be sitting here playing Fight the Landlord? Crassus stood up and laughed mockingly at the various representatives who had retreated to the door. The various representatives had awkward expressions, but there were more than one or two who were frightened, so it was not that embarrassing. It was just an overreaction. This sealing spell formation can only last for 3 more days at most. If we can't decipher all the runes in the spell formation in 3 days and effectively reinforce and restore the spell formation, it will break the seal. Novin, who had been working beside the spell formation, walked forward with a grave expression. He looked at the various representatives standing in front of the cave and said, "If there's anyone in your race who knows about ancient spell formations and runes, ask him to come to Chaos City immediately. Perhaps we still have a chance." 3 days. Everyone's expression darkened. Given this devil's terrifying power, it would definitely cause a terrifying disaster on the Norland continent once it escaped from the spell formation. Just like what was described on the mural, all the races would not be able to avoid it. Oster stood out and confidently said, "Although this fellow looks quite powerful, its power must have decreased after being sealed for so long. We have over 20 10th-tier powerhouses here. If we attack it together, we will definitely be able to kill it." Everyone looked at each other, and no one responded for a moment. Josh stepped forward and solemnly said, "I think Chief Oster is right. This devil concerns the safety of all the races on the Norland continent. Instead of pinning our hopes on this spell formation that could collapse at any time, why don't we join forces to kill it completely and resolve the crisis at hand?" Everyone was shocked that Josh supported Oster, and they also began to seriously consider whether the two's words were feasible. The power of over 20 10th-tier powerhouses joining forces was self-evident. However, no one was very confident if they could really kill that devil. "I think it's feasible. This is just a monster that has lived for a long time. Since it can be sealed, it means its power is still limited. If we can join forces to kill it, that would be a good thing. Even if we can't kill it, we can at least weaken it a little and allow the spell formation to last a little longer." Franklin walked out with a thick and black mace in his hand. He patted his chest heavily and said, "Does anyone dare to fight this fellow with me?" "Me." Oster stepped forward. "The Roth Empire is willing to contribute." Josh stepped forward. Richard wanted to say something, but he still stepped forward with that night to protect Josh. "The elves are also willing to contribute," Elliot said anxiously. Soon, all the representatives expressed their willingness to join Franklin in the battle with that devil. "All of you are really wise. If we can kill it, wouldn't the people who cut it into 2 and sealed it so painstakingly be fools?" Crassus said with a roll of his eyes. That might not be the case. Franklin did not argue too much. He charged towards the spell formation with his mace, and the black scales turned into heavy armor that covered his entire body very quickly. He turned into a black whirlwind and crashed into the sealing spell formation. Chapter 1769. Franklin led the charge. Since the representatives of the various races had agreed to attack together, they naturally wouldn't be a hindrance at such a time. All of them attacked. Oster followed Franklin into the sealing spell formation. Behind them, all sorts of magic spells, charms, and secret techniques were thrown at the octopus monster in the middle of the seal. Crassus stood at the side to protect Barbara, preventing her from getting hurt. Julian stood at the side with his arms crossed. He didn't have the intention to attack either. Dexter looked at Meg, and the latter shook his head. He didn't move either, and stared at Josh. Master, Connie had just opened her mouth when Rex had already pulled her out of the cave. He stood in front of her and instructed, "Don't look, don't listen." Lewis and Douglas looked at each other and threw out 2 spells symbolically. Smack! Franklin, who was leading the charge, was hit by the mace on the tentacle. Sticky liquid and flesh flew everywhere. That tentacle was almost broken by his mace. However, in the next instant, 3 tentacles hit his chest hard. The dragon scale armor shattered instantly, and the black whirlwind dissipated. The thick mace was flung away. Franklin spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were filled with fear, but there were still several tentacles that wrapped around his body that was flying backward. At this moment, Oster rushed up with a black sword. He rolled into the tentacles like a black whirlwind. Several magic spells and secret techniques also blasted on the octopus monster. Dazzling rays of light burst out, but when they landed on the octopus monster, it was as if they had been thrown into a swamp. The attacks of several level 10 powerhouses did not cause any ripples. What a terrifying defense! Everyone was shocked. Such a strong defense that could withstand the attacks of 10th tier powerhouses without any damage was already beyond their imagination. However, the battle had already started. Franklin and Oster were still in the spell formation, and there was no way to stop it. At this moment, Josh pointed the magic wand that he had been guiding for a long time at the ceiling spell formation. An inconspicuous explosive fireball flew towards the spell formation amidst the dazzling attacks. However, it didn't fly towards the octopus monster directly. Instead, it flew towards the ceiling spell formation on the ground. There is indeed something wrong with him. Irina, who had been paying attention to Joshua, raised her hand and conjured up a shield of light in front of the exploding fireball. The fireball exploded, causing ripples on the light shield, but it did not damage the foundation of the array. Irina! Josh's heart jolted upon seeing the shield of light that had suddenly appeared, and he turned to look at Irina in reflex. Irina was looking at him coldly. Her pure blue eyes seemed to be able to see through the darkness and filth in his heart. Could it be that she could tell? Josh's heart thumped wildly, and he tried his best to remain calm, but his wand was trembling uncontrollably. What's the point? You clearly have the upper hand, yet you're not willing to wait patiently? Meg pursed her lips in confusion as she looked at Josh. His actions basically indicated that he had made a deal with the devil. Perhaps he hadn't sold his soul yet, but that was enough. At the same time, Franklin and Oster, who had entered the ceiling formation, fell into a predicament. Countless tentacles wrapped around them, and they were unable to escape on their own. Our attacks are unable to break through the defense. Save them! Michael shouted as he looked at the 2 people who were in danger in the seal. The dazzling holy light pierced into the seal, and that octopus monster let out a shrill roar. At the same time, Douglas and Julian activated the frost domain and ice seal at the same time. The wriggling tentacles slowed down immediately, but the ice seal was also disappearing rapidly. Dexter raised the crystal ball in his hand and chanted an ancient and mysterious incantation. A monstrous wave slammed down, and a gap was opened in the tentacles that were blocking the 2 of them. Go! Franklin roared furiously and turned to run out of the seal. Just as he was about to dash out of the spell formation, a tentacle that had broken free from the ice seal slapped him on the back and sent him flying into the stone wall of the cave. As for Oster, who was surrounded by layers of tentacles, he was not so lucky. Before he could reach the edge of the spell formation, his left hand was entangled by a tentacle and quickly coiled up his hand like a snake. Oh no! Everyone was shocked when they saw that. If they were dragged away by that octopus monster, the consequences would be unimaginable. Oster was also a ruthless person. Seeing that he could not break free, and that the other tentacles were swarming towards him, he clenched his teeth and raised his hand to chop off his left hand that was entangled by the tentacles. Then, he pounced out of the spell formation. Novan raised his hand and forcefully pulled him out of thin air. Blood spurted out in a parabola, and he managed to break free from the tentacles that were about to entangle his leg. In the spell formation, that octopus monster used one of its tentacles to lift up Oster's broken arm and swayed it as if it was showing off. Then, it threw it into that huge mouth that was filled with rows of sharp teeth. My hand, Oster was supported by someone, and let out a shrill scream as he pressed on his right hand that was chopped off. This is a monster. A terrifying monster. Franklin crawled out from the pile of rocks by himself. He looked at the octopus monster in the seal spell formation in horror as he spat out blood. The expressions of the various representatives were similar. They saw with their own eyes that Franklin, who was known for his destructive power, could not even break a tentacle with his full strength. Instead, he was almost killed by a tentacle? How could they play this game? This fellow had tens of thousands of tentacles. They were having a mental breakdown. The octopus monster attacked the seal spell formation to vent its anger. Looking at that flickering seal barrier, the various representatives were a little frightened. At this moment, they finally understood what this seemingly weak seal spell formation meant. Michael heaved a sigh of relief secretly. Looking at the expressions of the various representatives, he knew that the intimidation effect was achieved. Hence, he said, everyone has seen the devil and its power. This matter concerns the future and safety of the Norland continent. We need the cooperation of all the races in order to obtain the final victory. Now, let's go back to the restaurant first. The various representatives did not refuse. The atmosphere here was really a little oppressive and scary. They felt pressured every second they stayed and couldn't wait to leave immediately. Hold on. Don't be in a hurry to leave. Irina walked out and sneered at Josh. There's a traitor on the devil's side among us. If we don't find him and get rid of him first, I don't want to be stabbed in the back while I'm fighting for my life. Traitor? The various representatives looked at Irina in shock and subconsciously distanced themselves from the people around them. Irina, you're not talking about me, are you? Josh looked at Irina in shock. He did not panic. Instead, he looked a little innocent and ridiculous. No pop-up window. Chapter 1770. Since you know it in your heart, then admit it openly. Irina stared straight at Josh. Her azure blue eyes seemed to be able to see through everything. The faint golden holy light landed on her, making her look like a goddess. Anyone could tell that Irina was targeting Josh. The various representatives looked at Josh and Irina with shock and uncertainty. The feud between the two of them was not rare on the Norland continent. There was a rumor in the early years that the king of the Roth Empire and the Elven Queen had discussed a marriage alliance. Josh and Irina might have already been engaged. It was said that it was because of this that Irina left the Wind Forest for the first time to travel the continent. That led to a series of legendary stories, as well as the many legends she left behind with Alex on the Norland continent. No one knew what Josh was thinking, but more than 3 years ago, Alex was ambushed in Rodu and disappeared without a trace. There were rumors that he died on a rainy night. Irina went into seclusion, and there were no more legends about this heroic couple. The Roth Empire blamed it on an enemy's attack, but all the other forces knew about it. Furthermore, there were also people who were involved in the ambush on that rainy night. Weston retreated to a corner and sized up Josh, Irina, and Alex carefully. Very few people knew that Alex and Irina had a daughter. She disappeared with Alex back then, and no one knew if she was dead or alive. Josh and Alex had a feud that would not end until one of them was dead. Irina obviously knew the truth, so he was not sure if Irina was trying to take revenge on Josh with the excuse of the devil, or if she had really discovered something. Everyone present had the same mentality, so they were cautious and did not rush to express their opinions. Irina, don't you dare slander His Highness the Second Prince, Richard shouted in a low voice. He stood protectively beside Josh and looked at Irina cautiously. The knight beside Joshua was also standing guard beside him with his sword in hand, and he appeared to be quite nervous. Perhaps there's some misunderstanding between us. This is the first time I've come here, and I've seen this demon. How can I be a traitor? Joshua did not try to hide anything. Instead, he looked at Irina in surprise. Perhaps you don't know, but the first person I came into contact with who exchanged souls with the devil was Borg. He attempted to use demonic energy to invade the tree of life and strengthen himself with it. In the end, his soul was controlled by the devil, so I killed him. Next was Ferdinand from the Falk tribe. He also exchanged his soul with the devil and released the devil in his heart. He plotted to kill his family, and I used the holy light to dispel the demonic aura on him. No one knows demons better than I do. The holy light will guide me. Irina raised the magic caster's staff in her hand, and a dazzling holy light began to condense. Irina, stop what you're doing now. If you attack the second prince for no reason, you and the night elves will have to bear the wrath of the Roth Empire. Richard shouted in a low voice as he raised his hand to form a magic barrier. At the same time, he pointed the magic wand in his hand at Irina. Irina, don't be rash, Michael also said. Everything happened so suddenly, and this was not part of their plan. Joshua was the second prince of the Roth Empire. Now that they were facing a great enemy, it was time for all the races to work together. If Irina really hurt Joshua and incurred the wrath and displeasure of the Roth Empire, it would be adding insult to injury. Since that's the case, I'll let you see what he did earlier. Irina tossed out an image recording stone. The image of everyone attacking the devil together appeared, and the focus of the image was on Joshua. When everyone was attacking the octopus monster from afar, Joshua released an explosive fireball. The fireball was mixed in with all the magic spells, but it did not fly towards the octopus monster. Instead, it slanted to the side and landed at the edge of the spell formation. However, at the instant that the fireball landed, a light shield appeared on the ground and absorbed all the power of the fireball. Everyone's expression changed drastically when they saw this scene. After experiencing the terrifying power of that devil, they had already realized the significance of this seemingly thin ceiling spell formation. However, Joshua's explosive fireball just now almost destroyed the spell formation and killed everyone here. Everyone looked at Joshua with anger and questioning gazes. Even Richard and that knight from the Roth Empire had a slight change of expression. How did this happen? Josh's expression was not as calm as everyone else's. Instead, he looked at the image that was still playing on loop in midair with a look of disbelief as he muttered, "My attack was clearly aimed at that octopus monster, so why did it appear there? This is completely different from what I saw." "Stop pretending. I already felt that you were a little strange when we were at the restaurant," Irina said coldly with a frown. "Irina, I know you have resentment and misunderstandings towards me. I will explain it to you in the future. However, as the second prince of the Roth Empire, I have everything that others can't even dream of having. Why should I exchange my soul with the devil and become like Ferdinand, who is neither human nor ghost?" Joshua shook his head and said sorrowfully and self-reproachfully, "I was too careless. Ever since I entered this cave, I had an inexplicable feeling of fear. I acted hastily just now because I wanted to do my part. Now that I see this scene, perhaps my mind was already controlled by that devil from the moment I entered the cave and almost caused a disaster. I was too weak, and my mind was not strong enough. That gave the devil a chance to take advantage of me. Luckily, you noticed the abnormality and stopped the disaster from happening. If I had really released this devil, I would not be able to redeem myself even if I died 1,000 times." Joshua looked at Irina gratefully. He took 2 steps forward and looked at her frankly. "If there is still demonic aura on me, or if I am possessed by an evil spirit, please use the holy light to expel it for me. I, Joshua, am magnanimous. I would rather die than be controlled and used by a devil. Your Highness." Richard wanted to go forward. "President, don't come forward." Joshua raised his hand to stop Richard. With a serious expression, he said, "This concerns the future of the Norland continent. I believe in Irina. If the devil really controlled me and I didn't know, I would really become a sinner for all eternity." Joshua's words were honest and sincere, and made the various representatives fall into deep thought. Even a top powerhouse like Lewis could be controlled by the devil. It didn't seem hard to understand that Joshua, who was only at the 7th tier, would be controlled by the devil to do such a thing. Meanwhile, Joshua's attitude made the crowd admire him. Those who dare to fight for the throne are indeed not simple. Meg looked at the honest Joshua and frowned slightly. Wonderful bookhouse. Chapter 1771. Irina also furrowed her brows at the sight of Josh's magnanimous expression. His attitude was rather abnormal. She was sure that he had a relationship with the devil, and this relationship was not established after entering the cave. If that was the case, then why did Josh dare to let her baptize him with the holy light so openly? After being baptized by the holy light, Ferdinand was almost a cripple. The damage to his mind and body could not be healed. I know I'm not good enough, and I'm not strong enough, but I hope I can always remain innocent. Josh looked at Irina, and his voice was gentle and affectionate. Come, take it as me begging you. Use the holy light to cleanse my innocence. If you don't take precautions in advance, you will be easily controlled by this guy, even if you are a 10th tier being. Lewis looked at Josh and nodded slightly. This child is not bad. He might have been targeted by the devil. As someone who had experienced it himself, he knew very well how terrifying the devil's mind control ability was. Therefore, he felt that the deduction that Josh was controlled by the devil at that moment, causing the direction of the bursting fireball to deviate, was plausible. There is such a possibility. Crassus nodded in agreement and looked at Josh. He shouldn't be that stupid. The attitudes of the two of them, more or less, represented the thoughts of the various representatives. Josh's frankness won everyone's favor, and they felt that he was a tragic hero who sacrificed himself for justice. If you were only temporarily bewitched by the devil, then the holy light would cause very little damage to you. It would only disperse the demonic aura on your body. However, if you exchanged souls with the devil, then the holy light would strip the devil from your soul. By then, you would become a fool, Irina said coldly as she looked into Josh's eyes. I believe I won't become a fool. Josh smiled gently and straightened his chest. Irina, I'm warning you. If you dare to cause any harm to His Highness Josh outside of the baptism, I will never let you off. Richard shouted at Irina coldly. Meg walked forward from the corner, stood beside Irina, and looked at Richard calmly. The two of them stood side by side. They were a perfect match, and everyone's attention was on them. Many people had already forgotten how majestic the two of them were when they roamed the continent. Wherever the holy light pointed, justice would be where it was. Today, the two of them once again stood side by side. They were still dazzling and eye-catching. Alex didn't say anything, but his imposing manner had already crushed Richard, who had just finished his harsh words. Within 3 meters, no one was faster than Alex, and no one could stop him. Josh's eyelids twitched, and he pursed his lips, but he didn't say anything else. With the enemy before us, what we need is trust. Since Prince Joshua is willing to prove his innocence, we'll have Irina baptize him with the holy light, and the truth will be revealed. As the host, Michael naturally couldn't let the situation turn into a stalemate. With a serious expression, he said, there are more than 10 10th tier powerhouses watching at the moment. We can guarantee absolute fairness. Please. Josh took another step forward and stood with his hands clasped behind his back. All right, then I'll fulfill your wish. Irina raised the magic caster's staff in her hand, and a melodious chant rang out. Holy light, please heed my call. Illuminate the darkness and purify all evil. Dazzling ray of holy light shot out from the magic caster's staff and landed on Josh's body. Wisps of black demon aura emerged from the top of Josh's head and were disintegrated by the holy light. However, Josh's expression was rather calm. He just closed his eyes subconsciously, and there was no sign of pain on his face. The overflow of black demon aura lasted for less than 10 seconds. The holy light landed on Josh's body, and there was no more reaction. There's not much demonic aura. It must have invaded his body when he was being controlled, Douglas said. The various representatives nodded. Judging from Josh's expression and the amount of black demon aura, it was as Douglas said. Josh did not exchange souls with the devil, and was only carelessly controlled by the devil earlier. Sure enough, His Highness is innocent. He's also a victim. Richard and the knight beside him were overjoyed and secretly relieved at the same time. How could this be? Irina frowned, but the holy light did not sense any more demonic aura on Josh's body. Although she was full of doubts, she had no choice but to retract the holy light. Meg took a deep look at Josh. He was not surprised by this outcome. Since he dared to take the initiative to accept the baptism of the holy light, it meant that he was not afraid of the holy light. The holy light receded, and Josh opened his eyes. He looked at Irina with clear eyes and smiled. Irina, thank you. I feel like I've undergone a spiritual baptism, and my chaotic feelings are all gone. If you hadn't discovered and dispelled it in time, I'm afraid it would have led to an even greater disaster. No matter what method you used, it won't end like this. Irina put away her magic caster's staff, turned around, and walked out of the cave. Meg gave Josh a strange smile and turned to follow Irina. What were you smiling about? Irina asked Meg. A pretentious smile can often bring great mental pressure to people. Meg smiled. Actually, I don't know what I'm smiling about. I've made everyone worry. Josh apologized to the representatives of the various races. He looked at Meg's back view and felt a little depressed. The smile he left behind made him feel a little uneasy, as if he had seen through everything. It was as if he was watching a pitiful and clumsy clown's performance, and it drove him crazy. Prince Josh is not controlled by the devil, so let's drop this matter. Let's go back to the restaurant to discuss countermeasures. Michael ended the farce and led everyone back to the restaurant through the teleportation portal. Well, I haven't bathed for a few days. Can I go back with you? Barbara hurriedly said. My work is done. I can't help with the rest. Of course. You are a hero who has made an outstanding contribution. Come back to the restaurant with us. You should receive your reward. Michael nodded with a smile. He knew very well what kind of contribution Barbara had made to the restoration of the spell formation during this period. Then I'll also go to the restaurant for a meal and see my precious disciple, Crassus said bluntly. We can't let you see her alone. Julian followed him out. If all of you leave, I have to go too. It's easy for problems to arise when I'm left alone. It's better to let the spell formation operate on its own. Novin walked out with a pile of drafts. He needed to make a trip back to the school to see if he could find any useful information in the library. The teleportation portal lit up, and there was no one in the cave. On the second floor of the restaurant, Irina looked at Meg, who was putting on an apron, and said, There's definitely something wrong with Josh, but his problem is different from Borg and Ferdinand. He's a smart person. Meg, who had changed into his chef's uniform, put on the apron and smiled at Irina. But whether he made a deal with the devil or not, it doesn't stop me from killing him. Your smile is very interesting. Irina was slightly stunned. Then, she couldn't help but pinch Meg's face. No pop-up window. Chapter 1772. Life was like a drama, and it all depended on acting skills. Meg, who had changed into his chef's suit, transformed into the most popular male chef in Chaos City. In the end, Meg could not tell if he was acting as Alex or Meg, but from the looks of it, his acting skills were still very good. As for why he didn't choose to sit there and have a meeting like a big boss, but instead, he chose to work in the kitchen. It was all because of the booking fee. Passion. Yes, seeing the big bosses of various races unable to control themselves in front of delicacies gave him a great sense of achievement. Josh could not be killed for the time being. If he died in Chaos City, the racial war might start earlier. The biggest enemy of the Norland continent now was the unknown number of Great Old Ones. They were like time bombs hidden all over the continent that could explode at any time. Furthermore, it was the kind that could detonate the entire continent. As for Josh, even if he were to let him live for a while longer, he would only be keeping him alive. He wouldn't pose any threat to him. The royal family had been the most heartless since ancient times. If there had been even the slightest mistake in the ambush on that rainy night, he wouldn't have ended up like that. He did not intend to let any of the three fathers and sons off. It was already 10:30 am. Meg glanced at Irina, who was standing by the window, deep in thought, and went downstairs. Meg naturally couldn't appear in the restaurant directly. Hence, he climbed over the wall at the back and took a detour before riding his bicycle back to the restaurant's entrance. Yabamiya and Reina were already waiting at the entrance. They had arrived on time to prepare for lunch. Mr. Meg, are you going to start preparing for lunch? Dicus asked Meg with a smile. Yes. We need to make some preparations in advance. Meg nodded with a smile. Dicus let everyone into the restaurant without hesitation. This was something that they had discussed before. When Meg and the rest entered, Vanessa, who was reading a gourmet magazine by the window, put down her book and walked over excitedly. She looked at Meg expectantly and said, Mr. Mack, is the menu for lunch also open today, including mutton kebabs? Yes. Meg nodded. That's great. I've seen Randy's new column, and I'm drooling. I must try the lamb kebab this afternoon, Vanessa said happily. Meg glanced at the smile on Vanessa's face. She was probably the most carefree foodie representative among all the representatives. But that was fine as well. It was not her place to worry about such things anyway. Being a happy foodie was a very blissful thing. Amy, little Amy? Just as Meg was about to enter the kitchen, a familiar voice came from the door. Crassus had already walked in and called out with a smile. Little Amy isn't even at the restaurant. Julian walked in and glanced at the restaurant. He couldn't help but look a little disappointed. Oh, it's the two teachers. The restaurant was booked by the City Lord's castle for a meeting today, so Amy went to her friend's place to play, Meg said without waiting for them to ask. I see. Crassus was a little disappointed. He wanted to give little Amy a surprise. It's not a surprise when a teacher suddenly appears at home during the holidays. It's a shock, Barbara said softly as she walked in. I didn't give her any homework for the winter break. Crassus pursed his lips. Boss sisters, I'm back. Barbara didn't continue the conversation. Instead, she opened her arms and ran toward Yabamiya and the others. Barbara. Yabamiya and the others were also surprised to see Barbara, who they had lost contact with for many days. The originally lively girl looked as if she had just crawled out of a coal mine. Her hair was a mess, and her clothes were dirty. It was a shock to see her. Upon seeing everyone's shocked expressions, Babla hurriedly stopped in her tracks. She lowered her head to look at her clothes and embarrassedly said, Aya, I haven't showered for too long. I'm suffocating. Barbara, where have you been these days? If you've been kidnapped, blink your eyes. Yabamiya held Barbara's hand and looked at her with concern and heartache. No, I want to do something big. Barbara shook her head. She then looked at Meg and asked, Boss, can I use the bathroom? Go ahead. I'll bring you some clean clothes in a while. Meg nodded with a smile. Seeing as Barbara had been working tirelessly to decipher the runes in the underground cave, he had no reason to turn her down. All right. Barbara immediately ran upstairs happily. She removed the dirty clothes on her body and turned on the tap. As the hot water poured on her body, her tiredness was completely soothed. She couldn't help but heave a long sigh of relief. I'll leave your clothes outside. After you shower, go soak in the bathtub for a while. Remember to come down for dinner later. I'll prepare more kebabs for you. Meg's voice came from outside. All right, Barbara replied happily. She looked at the bathtub that automatically filled with water. This treatment was really great. Meg went downstairs again. The various representatives had also returned to the restaurant under Michael's lead. However, compared to their high-spirited appearances when they had just left, the various representatives who had returned to the restaurant were clearly in a sorry state. They were like frosted eggplants, and everyone's face was filled with worry. Oster, who had lost an arm, sat with a dark face. His wound had stopped bleeding, but that severed arm was eaten by the octopus monster. He couldn't regrow his severed arm, so he would only be left with one arm for the rest of his life. It was inevitable that his power would decrease. Franklin didn't look too good either. His injuries were slightly better than Oster's, but his front and back were beaten up by the devil, so he didn't feel too good. He needed some time to recuperate. Big brother Josh, are you hurt? Did you guys get attacked? Vanessa also noticed the strange atmosphere and asked the pale-faced Josh nervously in a soft voice. Don't worry, it's just a small injury. Josh smiled at Vanessa, but didn't tell her what had happened earlier. What happened to them? Yabamiya asked softly in the kitchen. These people were the most powerful group of people on the Norland continent. Why would they be injured? Gina shook her head. She was also puzzled. Do what you're doing. Don't talk too much, Meg said softly. Yabamiya immediately kept quiet and helped to carry the plates. Michael looked at the various representatives and solemnly said, "Everyone has seen the situation. I believe everyone knows how serious it is. We urgently need to decipher the remaining dozens of runes. The formation masters from the giant dragons in Chaos City can't do anything about it. Now, we can only see if there are any formation masters or researchers in the ancient books who can decipher it." Chapter 1773. After witnessing and experiencing the horror of the devil, the various representatives had a deep understanding that the various races of the Norland continent had already become a community with a shared destiny. Even giant dragons couldn't face such a terrifying enemy alone. Everyone's conversation was a little gloomy, but the various representatives quickly reached a consensus. They obtained a set of runes that needed to be analyzed from Novin, and prepared to send it back to their respective races as soon as possible. They had to repair the spell formation within 3 days to solve this urgent problem. Principal Novin, if we can't analyze all the runes in this spell formation within 3 days, will it break out of the formation? Will it not be able to do without a single rune? Sally asked Novin. The various representatives also looked at Novin with concern. Yes, this seal spell formation is very complicated. It is made up of tens of thousands of runes. If there are a few runes that can't be analyzed, then it can't be repaired or reinforced. Any small mistake could cause this spell formation to collapse. Novin nodded with a serious expression. If that's the case, then we can only wait like this? I'm afraid it's very difficult to analyze such ancient runes in such a short time. There might even be runes that can't be analyzed at all. What should we do then? Sally continued to ask. We can't place all our hopes on this rune. Yes, Princess Sally's thoughts coincide with mine. Novin nodded. He looked at the various representatives and said, in the past few days, apart from analyzing the spell formation masters from Chaos City and the giant dragons have already set up countless sealing spell formations outside the sealed land. However, according to this devil's power, these sealing spell formations can only cause some hindrance to it, but not seal it. The expressions of the various representatives became even more serious. Therefore, apart from requesting the spell formation masters from the various races to come to Chaos City, I think we should gather all the top powerhouses on the Norland continent to Chaos City to prepare for the situation when that devil breaks out of the seal, Novin said in a low voice. This battle may be unavoidable. We have to make preparations in advance. Sally stood up with a serious expression and said, the elven race is willing to fight for the Norland continent. Sally. Elliot looked at Sally and opened his mouth anxiously. However, there was nothing he could do. The dwarf representative also stood up and solemnly said, Isen Castle can fend off all enemies, but we don't have the confidence to fend off this monster. Since we can't avoid it, we dwarves are willing to fight for the Norland continent. Dracula put down his glass and said with a smile, evil is really disgusting. The vampires can't stand it either. We are willing to fight with you. Lewis stood up and said, the giant dragon race has already unified their statements. If that devil really breaks the seal, the giant dragon race will fight with all their might. The Falk tribe is willing to join the war. Connie stood up with clenched fists. She had to take revenge. The August tribe will also kill that son of a bitch. Oster slammed the table angrily. The representatives of the various races expressed their support for joining forces against the demons. In the end, only the Roth Empire was left. Everyone turned to look at Joshua. I'm sorry. This is not something I can decide. I will report this to the king immediately. I believe His Majesty won't sit back and do nothing, Joshua said apologetically. Out of caution, he didn't make the decision on behalf of the Roth Empire. All right, since everyone has decided to join forces against the enemy, apart from gathering more spell formation masters to Chaos City, please also ask the powerhouses of the various races to prepare to reinforce Chaos City. The war could start anytime. Michael nodded and continued. Then, we need to discuss how to join forces against the enemy. We paid a terrible price in that cave today. but we didn't cause any substantial damage to that devil. This means that normal means can't kill it. The various representatives began to discuss how to deal with that devil with solemn expressions. So far, the holy light spell should be the most effective and harmful magic against that devil. However, even if I cast it with all my might, I still couldn't cause any fatal damage to it. Furthermore, there are very few magic casters who know the holy light spell, Irina said. The Magus Tower has 3 light-type magic casters who know the holy light spell. I will ask them to come with the team, but they are only 6th tier or 7th tier, Richard said. The elves have 2 magic casters who know the holy light spell. They can also come as reinforcements, Sally said. That's far from enough. Irina shook her head. The 2 light-type magic casters in the elves were also only 6th tier or 7th tier. The damage they could cause to that devil was limited. Everyone fell into a gloomy atmosphere again. I've never felt so aggrieved in my life. Franklin hammered his thigh angrily. Meg looked at everyone who had fallen into a tense atmosphere and interrupted. It's lunchtime. Would you like to order? Everyone looked at Meg with furrowed brows. This boss really doesn't know how to read people's faces. They were discussing the survival of the Norland continent now. Was this the time to eat? I want 20 mutton skewers and an insanely spicy grilled fish, Vanessa said without hesitation. Insanely spicy again? All the representatives looked at each other. They thought of the insanely spicy hot pot in the morning and suddenly felt their hearts burning. However, their stomachs were craving food again. After thinking about it carefully, there was no point in staying in such a tense atmosphere. They might as well eat something to calm themselves down. Then, they would have the energy to continue the discussion. Give me a roast duck. I've been down there for so many days. My taste buds are getting bland, Crassus said without hesitation. A savory tofu pudding and a braised chicken and rice, Julian said. Do you want hot pot again? Lewis asked Jinx, who was beside him. No. Jinx shook his head like a rattle drum. How about the insanely spicy grilled fish? Jinx glanced at Vanessa. I can't afford it. Jinx glared. Now, whenever he heard the word insanely spicy, he would feel his anus tighten. Useless. Lewis pursed his lips and then said, a large, mildly spicy grilled fish. I'm sorry, but the spicy grilled fish starts at the medium spicy level, Meg said with a smile. Lewis pondered for a moment before nodding in a serious manner. All right, I'll have a medium spicy grilled fish then. The representatives learned their lesson and didn't order from Vanessa anymore. This young lady looked weak, but her taste was extraordinary. They each chose a dish that they thought was good and prepared to try something new. Here, 10 servings of beggar's chicken, Dexter said. Dexter said in the broken common. All the representatives looked over. All right. Meg nodded with a smile. He wasn't too surprised. This was Lantist's holy chicken, after all. If he had the chance to eat at the restaurant, it would naturally be his first choice. Right at this moment, a golden array formation light suddenly lit up in the middle of the empty space surrounded by tables. Barbara, Father is here to save you. Following that, an angry roar sounded. Chapter 1774. The sudden appearance of the teleportation portal and that energetic shout stunned all the representatives present. They looked at Michael instinctively, thinking that this teleportation portal was also arranged by Michael. Michael was equally bewildered. The City Lord's castle didn't arrange a teleportation portal in Mamis. Even the teleportation portal to the Sealed Land was arranged in the plaza. How could they arrange a teleportation portal at Mr. Mac's place? Mag faltered slightly at the sight of the spell formation before his eyes quickly lit up. The combination of Babla and Father revealed far too much information. Furthermore, Babla had come to the Norland continent through this ancient teleportation formation beneath the restaurant. As the Moon Nation's beloved princess, the king of the Moon Nation wouldn't sit by and do nothing after she mysteriously disappeared through the teleportation portal. Barbara had been trying to restart the teleportation portal for the past few months, but she had always failed. Now that the ancient teleportation portal had been activated again, and the person hadn't arrived yet, but such a figure had already appeared. He couldn't help but think about it. A golden light flashed, and a group of people appeared in the empty space where everyone was sitting. Among them were swordsmen holding heavy swords with both hands, magic casters holding magic casters' staffs, and defense-type warriors carrying heavy shields. All of them were guarding the middle-aged man standing in the middle of the group, who was wearing a gorgeous golden robe and a golden gemstone crown. There were 10 people in the group, and 6 of them were 10th-tier powerhouses. Which faction is this? The various representatives were a little confused when they saw this group of people who had suddenly appeared. They had just barely accepted the existence of Lantist, and now a group of unfamiliar and mysterious powerhouses had suddenly appeared. Was there an end to this? Meg's gaze landed on the middle-aged man with the crown. His brows and eyes were similar to Barbara's, but the most important thing was the light pink crescent between his brows, which was more obvious than Barbara's. He was definitely his biological father. Meg was basically certain of his judgment. The people from the Moon Nation were also a little confused at this moment. They had thought of the possible situations that might happen after they entered the teleportation portal, such as countless terrifying unknown creatures and an extremely difficult living environment. However, the current situation seemed to be a little different from what they had imagined. After the teleportation was completed, they were actually trapped in a terrifying encirclement. There were more than 20 level 10 experts who were eyeing him covetously. They were of different shapes and races, but they all possessed undeniably powerful auras. It was a hellish start. "Protect the king," the white-haired great magician shouted in a deep voice. He raised his hand, and a magic barrier enveloped everyone. At the same time, he said in a low voice, "Restart the teleportation array. We have to leave this place immediately." Everyone gripped their weapons tightly. Although they were in great danger, no one retreated. They were prepared to sacrifice themselves to protect the king. Although they did not know where they had been teleported to, they were outnumbered, and it was not suitable for them to fight. The most important thing was to escort His Majesty away safely. "Wait." Kenneth waved his hand and stopped the formation master from restarting the formation. He said in a deep voice, "I won't return until I find the princess. Your Majesty, this place is extremely dangerous." The great magician tried to persuade him. "There's no need to say any more." Kenneth interrupted the great magician's words. He scanned the people present and the surrounding environment with his gaze. This place looked like a meeting hall. The powerhouses present should be having a meeting here, and not here to ambush them. Otherwise, their weapons would not be by their side, but in their hands. Moreover, the people present were a mix of races. There were elves, forest trolls, dwarves, goblins, and ferocious-looking demons that were recorded in ancient books. They did not seem to be from the same force. After being stunned for a moment, the representatives of the various races looked at the people who were preparing for battle. They also took out their weapons and prepared for battle. Everyone was already worried about the demons. Now that a group of people with unknown origins had suddenly appeared, they naturally had to be on their guard. For a moment, the atmosphere in the restaurant was tense, and swords were drawn. Could it be? Crassus looked at the people who had come, but his eyes lit up. He looked at Julian, who was sitting beside him. "It's the same aura." Julian nodded. His cold face also brightened up a little. "Who are you?" Michael asked in a deep voice. He did not know the identity of this group of powerhouses who had mysteriously barged in. "Where's this place? Who are you? If you're the ones who kidnapped my daughter, quickly send her here. If she's fine, I won't hold it against you," Kenneth said coldly. "Daughter?" The representatives of the various races frowned. "Where is Barbara now? Why don't I see her? With her abilities, she's definitely not a match for this group of people." Kenneth looked anxious when he saw that no one answered. Sorry to interrupt." Meg walked forward and said, Everyone looked at Meg. This restaurant owner seemed to be reckless. He actually dared to walk forward in the face of such a group of mysterious powerhouses. "Do you know where my daughter is?" Kenneth's gaze landed on Meg like 2 sharp swords. "If I didn't guess wrongly, Uncle, your daughter should be called Babla, right?" Mag said to Kenneth with a smile as he looked at him fearlessly. "How did you know?" Kenneth's face darkened. "What did you do to her?" "What do you mean, what did I do to her? What kind of person do you take me for? I've clearly helped you raise your daughter very well." Meg rolled his eyes and smiled. Your daughter is great, beast. Kenneth exploded instantly. The pink moon on his forehead lit up, and a set of golden and pink armor appeared on his body. He looked like he was going to fight Meg to the death. Huh. Meg raised his eyebrows. This king of the Moon Nation did not seem to be playing by the rules. He had clearly taken in his daughter out of kindness, but what was he planning to do now? Ha! Irina chuckled and raised her magic caster's staff to cast a light shield on Meg. Father! Just then, a surprised cry came from the staircase. Barbara! Kenneth, who was charging forward, stopped instantly. He turned around abruptly and looked at the figure that he had been thinking about all this time at the staircase. His eyes were filled with surprise. It's me. Barbara rushed over like a whirlwind and threw herself into Kenneth's arms. Child, father is late. Kenneth hugged Barbara tightly and said with joy and guilt, Your Highness. When the people of the Moon Nation saw this, they were also delighted. However, they did not let down their guard against the people around them. They are father and daughter. When the representatives of the various races saw this scene, they were surprised, but they also withdrew their hostility. Tell father, did he bully you? Kenneth's gaze was still looking at Meg, but it was less hostile and more scrutinizing. Chapter 1775. Barbara had activated the teleportation portal and left the Moon Nation alone for more than 2 months. What Kenneth was most worried about was that Barbara, who had lived in the palace since she was young, and had been pampered and cared for in every way, would encounter bad people. However, seeing that she didn't have any injuries on her body now, and although she had changed her clothes, her mental state and appearance looked good. She didn't look like she had suffered, so Kenneth felt much more relieved. You mean boss? Barbara glanced at Meg and shook her head with a smile. No, boss and everyone treated me very well. I had a good time here. Meg heaved a sigh of relief secretly. Luckily, this last didn't spout nonsense. Otherwise, it would be bad if she was targeted by the Lord of the Moon. Moreover, the head of his family was also watching at the side. Boss. Kenneth frowned. He looked at Barbara and then at Meg. I've been working as a waitress in the restaurant during this period. I'm in charge of the very important task of serving dishes, Barbara said proudly. Babla boasted. I'm using spatial magic to carry the dishes. They're fast and steady. Serving dishes? Kenneth's eyes widened, and there was a hint of anger on his face. The various representatives who had more or less figured out the relationship between everyone also gave Meg sidelong glances. He actually let a princess serve dishes in the restaurant as a waitress. This restaurant's owner was really brave. His courage was commendable. Or rather, he was really awesome. How dare you, unruly commoner? How dare you let Her Highness do such a low-level job? That great magic caster shouted in a deep voice. He glared at Meg angrily and wished he could kill him with a punch. This is the job that she chose herself. Meg was very calm. What was so strange about a princess serving as a waitress? Didn't the elven princess wash the floor here before? The chief of the Fawk tribe had even delivered takeout before. The princess of the vampire tribe cut bread, and the princess of Lantis was in charge of coaxing children. Was the princess of the Moon Nation more advanced? Master, don't be angry. I'm just applying what I've learned. I didn't know what spatial magic was used for, but now that I've discovered that it can be used to carry dishes, it's indeed very convenient, Barbara said with a smile. This. The Archmage looked at Barbara with a complicated expression. He was so angry that he couldn't say anything for a long time. He could only sigh. As long as Princess is happy. Meg looked at the great magician with some pity. He suddenly understood his anger. To have such a disciple, it was a blessing to not be angered to death. He really didn't force you? Kenneth looked at Barbara and asked. Of course, the boss is just an ordinary person. If I want to leave, how can he stop me? Barbara nodded and smiled. I kept it for myself. The restaurant is great. The ladies here are all geniuses, and the boss's cooking is delicious. I'm very happy to stay here. That's great. Now Sister Barbara can go home, Gina said softly. Yeah, she can go back and be a princess again. However, I'm a little reluctant to part with her. Mia nodded and looked at Barbara reluctantly. Kenneth had already confirmed that Barbara didn't suffer in this world. He finally felt relieved. He bowed slightly to Meg and gratefully said, "I apologize for offending you earlier. I'm King Kenneth of the Moon Nation. Thank you for taking in my daughter and protecting her." The people from the Moon Nation also bowed to Meg. "You're welcome. Barbara is a great employee and also our friend," Meg quickly said. He was a little caught off guard by Kenneth's sudden change in attitude. "I came in a hurry this time, so I didn't have time to prepare a gift for you. I'll bring my daughter home today, and I'll come again with a gift to thank you next time." Kenneth looked at Meg and then turned to look at the various representatives in the restaurant. "Please forgive us for disturbing you. We'll leave now and not disturb you." As he spoke, the Formation Master had already started to activate the teleportation portal. The various representatives looked at the people from the Moon Nation who came in a hurry and left in a hurry. They couldn't react in time. "Wait a minute." Barbara, who was holding onto Kenneth's arm, suddenly jumped out of the range of the teleportation portal. "Barbara, we should go back." Kenneth reached out his hand to Barbara. There were too many powerhouses here, so it wasn't wise to stay for long. "Father, I came back especially for dinner. I'm starving now. Why don't you wait for me to have a meal first before we go back?" Barbara pouted and acted coquettishly. Her stomach even made a growling sound at the right time. "After we go back, I'll get them to prepare a table full of your favorite food, including endless roast meat," Kenneth said dotingly. "No way. Their culinary skills are far worse than Boss. I've been craving mutton kebabs and beef kebabs for a long time." Barbara shook her head firmly. She jumped out of the circle of the round table and took a few steps back. "This child." Kenneth looked at Barbara helplessly. He didn't expect that he wasn't as important as a serving of roast meat. "Everyone, there's no need to leave in a hurry. We're the representatives of the various races on the Norland continent. We didn't expect to meet the people from the Moon Nation here for a meeting today. If King Kenneth doesn't mind, you can sit down and have a meal with the people from the Moon Nation. Take it as a token of appreciation from the Norland continent," Michael said to Kenneth with a smile. The only key to solving the Norland continent's problem might be with the people from the Moon Nation. Of course, they couldn't just leave like that. It's indeed the Norland continent. Kenneth was certain. In the past few months, apart from repairing the teleportation portal, they had also read various ancient books and made many deductions about the teleportation destination. Among them, they deduced that the other end of the teleportation portal might be on the Norland continent. There weren't many records about the Norland continent in the ancient books. They didn't even know if it existed. However, the successfully repaired teleportation portal connected the Moon Nation and the Norland continent. "Don't worry, Royal Father. This city lord isn't a bad person," Barbara said to Kenneth. "Of course, we can't rule out whether the others are bad people. All right, then we'll have to impose on you." Kenneth wasn't a timid person. Since Barbara didn't want to leave in a hurry, he didn't force her. He nodded and agreed to stay. The staff at the city lord's castle got busy immediately. They added a few more tables for the people from the Moon Nation to sit down. Everyone sized each other up and wasn't in a hurry to speak. Josh's gaze swept across the people from the Moon Nation, and he frowned. The sudden addition of the two major powers, the Moon Nation and Lantist, was not a good thing for the Roth Empire that wanted to conquer the entire continent. "Royal Father, take a look at this menu. Let me tell you, my boss's cooking is really superb. Roast mutton kebabs, roast beef kebabs, red braised pork." Kenneth was still thinking about how to officially interact with the forces on the Norland continent when Barbara had already started recommending the dishes to him with the menu. No pop-up window. Chapter 1776. Meg was busy in the kitchen, preparing food for the guests while observing the people from the Moon Nation at the same time. They were fretting over how to repair the seal when the people from the Moon Nation teleported over so coincidentally. To the current situation, they were no different from heavenly soldiers. One had to know that Barbara had contributed greatly to the analysis of most of the seal spell formation during this period of time. The Moon Nation had preserved a batch of ancient books and inheritances passed down from ancient times. This was something that no race on the Norland continent could produce. Now that her master was here, and there were a few spell formation masters accompanying him. They could only rely on them to repair the seal within 3 days. Under Barbara's strong recommendation, the Moon Nation's delegation had 10 beef kebabs and mutton kebabs each, and ordered whatever they wanted to eat for themselves. "Have you revealed your identity to them?" Kenneth and Barbara asked softly. "No. Before this, only the boss and my friends knew." Barbara shook her head and also softly said, "But I've been helping to save their world these few days, so I can sit and eat with them." "Save the world?" Kenneth was a little puzzled. Although Barbara was extremely talented in spatial magic, she was still young and was only at the 7th tier now. Given her ability, it wouldn't be her turn to save the world, right? Moreover, she had to sit and eat with a group of 10th tier powerhouses at the same table. "I'll talk to you about this later." Barbara brushed it off, and then asked if her mother was well and if anything interesting happened in the Moon Nation. Although Kenneth was puzzled, he had finally found his daughter, so he naturally had to pamper her. Thus, he started to talk to her about some of the things that had happened recently. Michael had originally planned to get in touch with Kenneth first to get closer so that he could ask for their help later. However, seeing that the father and daughter were talking so enthusiastically, he didn't rush to ask. The various representatives couldn't figure out the background and attitude of Kenneth and his group, so they didn't say much. The existence of the Moon Nation had always been a legend. When they looked up at the starry sky, they would often wonder if there was really life on the moon. However, when the passageway between the Moon Nation and the Norland continent was opened, and the people of the Moon Nation really came to the Norland continent, all of the races became even more wary and worried. No one knew how powerful the Moon Nation was, but the vanguard they sent out to search for the princess had 7 10th-tier powerhouses. It was clear that they were stronger than the average race. If they tried to migrate to the Norland continent, or if they wanted to own a piece of land on the Norland continent, it would greatly affect the situation on the Norland continent. Everyone had their own thoughts. For a moment, no one spoke as they quietly waited for the dishes to be served. However, Novin changed his seat and sat beside the great magic caster from the Moon Nation. He pulled out a piece of paper that was filled with runes and smiled as he said, "Hello, I'm Novin. Can I ask you about these runes?" Jonas glanced at Novin with a hint of surprise in his eyes. This man who looked slightly disheveled was actually also a 10th-tier great magic caster. Furthermore, judging from the magical waves emanating from him, he should also be a spatial magic caster. After a moment of hesitation, Jonas still took the piece of paper. He glanced at the runes on it and couldn't help but let out a soft gasp. He looked at Novin and said, "Where did you find these runes? It seems like they should be used on a spell formation." Everyone looked over. They knew what Novin was holding, but they didn't expect this great magic caster to be able to see the origin of these runes at a glance. They wondered if he could decipher the rest of the runes. Novin's eyes lit up, and he continued to ask, "These ancient runes were copied from an ancient sealing spell formation. I wonder if Master knows what they mean?" "I know a little, but the runes have to be placed in a complete spell formation for them to be meaningful. If we dissect and analyze them separately, we might misunderstand their meaning." Jonas nodded. Over the past few months, they had flipped through countless ancient books in the Moon Nation before successfully repairing that ancient teleportation spell formation. Hence, they had some understanding of most of the runes on this piece of paper. To be honest, we're currently in big trouble. A powerful and terrifying devil was sealed in ancient times, but it has survived until now. Now, this sealing spell formation can no longer continue to seal it because it's too old. We have to reseal it before it breaks out of the seal and escapes. Otherwise, the Noran continent will encounter a terrifying calamity. Novin stood up and solemnly said to Jonas, "I sincerely hope that everyone can help us repair the sealing spell formation and reseal that devil." Jonas, Kenneth, and the rest were surprised to hear that. They had just arrived here and didn't even know what kind of existence the other party was. They didn't expect Novin to make such a request to them. A terrifying devil that has survived from ancient times until now. Jonas frowned as he recalled some ancient legends that he had read during this period of time when he was flipping through ancient books. Among them, there were fragments of some powerful gods sealing terrifying devils. "Royal Father, Master, what Principal Novin said is true. That fellow is super terrifying. If we let it escape, I don't think we'll be safe even if we bring it to the moon. Barbara kept her smile, and with a serious expression, she said, I've been helping them to analyze the runes of that sealing spell formation these few days. These are the runes that we can't analyze, and we're stuck in a deadlock. Now, Master, you're here. You're the best spell formation masters in the Moon Nation. You definitely have a way to reseal that fellow. Jonas didn't rush to answer. Instead, he looked at Kenneth. You're saying that devil is even more powerful than 10th tier powerhouses? Kenneth asked Barbara. It's more than powerful. Just now, more than 10 10th tier powerhouses joined forces to attack that devil sealed in the spell formation. In the end, that devil was unscathed. One of their arms was broken, and 2 of them almost died, Barbara said with a nod. She still had some lingering fear. Tisk, everyone from the Moon Nation gasped. More than 10 10th tier powerhouses joined forces, but they couldn't do anything to that devil. How terrifying was that devil's power? Is what my daughter said true? Kenneth looked at Michael. He should be the one who had more right to speak among these people. Yes, what Princess Barbara said is not false at all. That devil's power far surpasses ours, and it has extremely strong magical and physical resistance. The only way now is to reseal it, and then find a way to kill it, Michael said solemnly. Chapter 1777. The current predicament was no longer something that the Norland continent could overcome by putting up a strong front. Hence, Michael and the rest decided to request help from the moon civilization that they had just come into contact with. Kenneth fell into deep thought after hearing that. He didn't doubt the truth of what Barbara and Michael said. The existence of the devil was as mysterious as the existence of a bigger world outside the Moon Nation to the people of the Moon Nation. However, they were standing on the Norland continent now, so the existence of the devil didn't seem so unacceptable anymore. Furthermore, there was a teleportation portal between the Moon Nation and the Norland continent, and they could communicate in a similar language. This meant that there might be some connection between the two since ancient times, and they might even be of the same origin. Kenneth didn't agree immediately and asked Michael, "Can you bring us to check out that so-called sealing spell formation and the devil?" "Of course." Michael nodded. Kenneth's caution wasn't hard to understand. Wait a minute. Barbara reached out to pull Kenneth, who was about to get up, and quickly said, "Don't be in such a hurry. The boss will be done cooking soon. It won't be too late for us to go after we eat." "You only know how to eat." Kenneth stroked Barbara's head affectionately and shook his head. "Eating is just a matter of filling the stomach. If the situation is really so serious, this matter is obviously. The mutton skewers are ready." Right at this moment, Yabamiya walked out with a few long plates that were piled up into a small hill and placed them in front of the people of the Moon Nation one by one. The rich aroma of roasted mutton wafted over immediately. The roasted mutton had just been placed on the grill, and the glistening fatty meat was still sizzling with oil. The surface was sprinkled with a handful of cooked sesame seeds and tender green onions. Gulp. Kenneth's Adam's apple moved obviously. He looked at the big plate of roasted mutton skewers in front of him and couldn't take his eyes off of it. He paused in the middle of his sentence and hesitated for a moment before continuing. "This matter can obviously be put aside first. I haven't eaten with you for a few months. Father isn't in a hurry to leave. Let me accompany you for a meal first." Everyone in the Moon Nation looked at Kenneth with admiration. "His Majesty is wise." "Father, are you serious?" Barbara raised her eyebrows in disbelief. "Of course." Kenneth nodded calmly, but his gaze was fixed on the kebab. "All right, for the sake of these mutton skewers, I'll pretend to believe you." Barbara shrugged and picked up a skewer of mutton. She bit off a piece of meat and chewed happily. Freshly roasted mutton was the most delicious. Kenneth nodded slightly at Michael, and then picked up a mutton skewer without standing on ceremony. The roasted mutton of this world was quite special. Perhaps due to the lack of resources, the mutton was cut into small pieces and skewered on bamboo skewers, unlike the Moon Nation which roasted it whole. However, the flaws couldn't obscure the beauty of the meat. He had to admit that the rich aroma of the mutton was indeed more enticing than the roast mutton made by his family's imperial chef. Furthermore, There wasn't the slightest hint of the rank odor of mutton. Just this point alone was enough to show that this chef was better than his family's imperial chef. The food that Barbara was so infatuated with must be delicious. With the mentality of trying it out, Kenneth took a bite of the mutton. The mutton that had just been taken off the grill was still a little hot, and the surface was slightly charred, but the inside was exceptionally tender. When he bit into it, the gravy of the meat immediately splashed in his mouth, and the spices attached to the surface of the mutton also bloomed in his mouth. The fragrance of the onions and the sesame seeds that exploded during chewing made the taste buds on the tip of his tongue fall into a carnival. What kind of divine taste is this? The taste is too good. One bite after another, Kenneth still felt like he couldn't stop after eating 3 mutton skewers in a row. His imperial chef had completely lost the right to participate in this duel. As the king of the Moon Nation, he had to admit that he had never tasted such delicious food in the long years of his rule. Not even one. He glanced at Barbara, who was immersed in eating the skewers, and suddenly could understand why she was willing to stay in this restaurant. There was no need for other complicated reasons. These mutton skewers were already better than countless reasons. The rest of the people in the Moon Nation were also conquered by the mutton skewers. One bite after another, they felt that the meat skewered with bamboo skewers was convenient and flavorful. That was how roasted meat should be eaten. Seems like the taste of the Moon Nation is similar to that of the Norland continent. Meg looked at the people who were engrossed in eating the skewers and curled his lips slightly. The sense of accomplishment in his heart increased a little. The Moon Nation's mutton skewers were served first. The other customers who hadn't served their dishes smelled the aroma and saw the mountain of meat skewers decreasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. All of them couldn't help but swallow their saliva. However, everyone had ordered quite a number of dishes and was too embarrassed to change now. Hence, they could only watch and wait for their own dishes to be served. Meg's actions were very fast. Not long after the skewers were served, the 10 beggars' chickens from Lantist were ready. Dexter and the Lantistians looked at the beggar's chicken that was roasted like a golden egg. Their expressions became solemn and reverent, and they all bowed to the beggar's chicken. This was the holy item that saved Lantist from the abyss of suffering. Gina held a small wooden hammer in her hand and solemnly knocked open the mud casing that was wrapped around the chicken. Following a few crisp sounds, the hardened mud casing was knocked open one by one. The golden and crispy beggar's chicken was revealed in front of everyone, and the rich aroma of the roasted chicken spread with the heat. Everyone was very familiar with the golden mud casing. This was the key that allowed the Lantistians to leave the bottom of the sea. However, this was the first time that many Lantistians had seen a roasted chicken wrapped in a mud casing. The rich aroma wafted over from such a close distance and was hard to resist. "Please enjoy." Gina turned and left with a smile. "Let's dig in," Dexter said. He took out a small knife from somewhere, and with a swing of the knife, the beggar's chicken on the plate was cut into a dozen pieces. He reached out and picked up a drumstick. The crispy chicken skin was bitten open gently, and the tender meat melted in his mouth. The tenderness and freshness that belonged to the chicken bloomed instantly, and the taste buds on the tip of his tongue were disarmed immediately. He didn't have time to chew, and before it could gain a firm foothold on the tip of his tongue, it slid down his throat like a naughty little chick, tender without any dregs, with a unique flavor. This unexpected delicacy made Dexter, who was usually calm, let out a soft hum uncontrollably. Such an exquisite delicacy actually exists. Mr. Meg's culinary skills are simply divine. He is indeed the man chosen by God. Dexter exclaimed. Words couldn't describe how touched he was. He could only take a few more bites to express his thoughts. The representatives from the Moon Nation and Lantist, who were the last to arrive, were eating the roasted chicken and eating the roasted chicken. The various representatives were so hungry that they couldn't control themselves, and their gazes towards the kitchen became more frequent. This was a gathering that had gathered all of the top powers, but Mag was the chef, so it was a little strange to see him in such a state. No pop-up window. Chapter 1778. The sumptuous and delicious lunch gave the people from the Moon Nation a good first impression of the Norland continent. To be able to entertain them with such delicacies was enough to show their sincerity and effort. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Kenneth didn't waste any more time. He brought Jonas and the two formation masters, and followed Novin and Barbara to the place where the devil was sealed. After a while, Kenneth, Jonas, and the rest stood outside the sealing spell formation. They were shocked speechless as they looked at the terrifying octopus monster that was close to 1,000 meters tall in the spell formation. Such an evil and terrifying aura. I didn't expect devils to really exist in this world. Kenneth had a shocked expression. All his previous doubts were dispelled at this moment. Barbara's description wasn't exaggerated at all. This devil was indeed powerful and terrifying. Even as a 10th-tier powerhouse, they still felt small and powerless in front of it. When they just arrived, this devil even attacked the seal angrily once. That thin spell formation that was on the verge of collapse made everyone a little afraid that it would disperse. This sealing spell formation is indeed passed down from ancient times. It should be from the same period as that teleportation portal. Jonas walked around the sealing spell formation and looked at the octopus monster in the spell formation with a grave expression. So, this fellow has survived from ancient times until now, and still maintains its terrifying power. The expressions of Kenneth and the rest changed slightly. A terrifying devil that had existed since ancient times. Apart from repairing and strengthening the spell formation, we have no other way to deal with it at the moment, Novin said in a low voice. Your Majesty, I think we should help them repair the spell formation. If this devil breaks the seal, it will bring disaster to countless innocent lives. With its power, we can't guarantee that it won't come to the Moon Nation, Jonas said to Kenneth. Kenneth was silent for a while before he nodded. I allow you to cooperate with them to repair this seal and reseal this devil. A smile appeared on Novin and Barbara's faces. Master, we've already completed the analysis of most of the runes in the spell formation. Why don't we start from these 60-odd runes? Barbara went forward with a smile. No, we'll start from the beginning. However, Jonas shook his head and smilingly said to the puzzled Barbara, this array formation is even more complicated than that teleportation portal. We only have 3 days, and we can't afford to make any mistakes. Hence, we have to reanalyze the array formation from the beginning to ensure that every rune is correct. All right, some of my runes were indeed half-guessed. Barbara nodded and followed behind them with a small notebook, ready to act as an assistant. Jonas circled the spell formation and observed it for a long time. He looked at Novin and said, apart from analyzing the spell formation, we also need as many spell formation materials as possible. According to my observation, the original seal formation is already close to collapsing, and we can't directly reinforce and repair it. We can only rebuild a seal formation. All right, I will arrange this matter with the city lord. Novin nodded. It wasn't that he didn't know about this. It was just that he couldn't even analyze the spell formation previously, let alone rebuild a seal formation. Now that Jonas and the other two had joined in, the dilemma had been resolved. We only have 1 day to analyze this spell formation, so we have to ensure that it's accurate and fast. Let's start now with the princess's analysis as the foundation. Jonas brought the 3 formation masters with him and immediately immersed themselves in the task of analyzing the spell formation. Novin made a trip back to the restaurant and informed the various representatives that the Moon Nation was willing to help the Norland continent rebuild the seal formation, but they needed the various clans to provide as many materials as possible. This is a list of materials. The materials used for the ancient seal formation are very precious, and there are many types. It's not something that 1 or 2 clans can provide. Hence, I hope that the various clans can collect these materials as much as possible and send them to Chaos City before noon tomorrow. Novin looked at the various representatives present. This is a war against time. We don't have much time left. We have to rebuild a seal formation and reseal that devil. That's great. If we can reseal it, we won't have to be on tenterhooks anymore, Elliot said with a smile with an excited expression. That's the most optimistic outcome. Novin glanced at Elliot. However, that devil might have already escaped before we can finish building the spell formation. Hence, I hope that all of you can still prepare the powerhouses in your clans to reinforce Chaos City at any time. This is a matter that concerns all the clans on the Norland continent. No one can be spared. The various representatives nodded in agreement. They knew that what Novan said was true. Lewis stood up with a grave expression and said, "Sealing it is only the beginning. We don't know how many of these sealing spell formations have been passed down since ancient times, and whether they can still take on the task of sealing the devil. However, what we can be sure of is that the lower half of this devil should still be sealed somewhere on the Norland continent." The various representatives' expressions turned grave when they heard that. "If the devil that was sealed somewhere escapes without us knowing," Connie said softly, "then we will have no way to avoid it. We can only fight it," Rex said calmly. The various representatives were silent. However, that seemed to be the only choice. "Now, that old man Edward should have a headache, right?" Meg looked at Josh, who had a grave expression, and curled his lips. He removed his apron and prepared to go out for a stroll and fetch Amy back while he was at it. Meg was no longer interested in what the various representatives were talking about in the afternoon. It was nothing more than how to coordinate the combat power of the various clans to deal with the worst possible situation. As for the issue of territory that was hotly contested in the morning, it had already been put aside. Although most of the reason was because of the sudden incident with the devil, some of it was also because of the sudden emergence of Lantist and the Moon Nation. These two factions had quite a number of high-end combat power. If they were to join the fight for territory, there might be an uncontrollable situation. Meg knew Lantist's attitude. They actually didn't have much desire to fight for land with the other clans. As the only amphibious race on the Norland continent, the boundless ocean was their territory. There was an abundance of food there, and the environment was livable. There was no need for them to fight for land. As for the Moon Nation, before they built a new large-scale passageway, they didn't have the ability to import a large amount of military power to join the fight for land with the other clans. The teleportation portal was in his restaurant. Meg even started to consider if he should build a moon landing ticket station in his restaurant in the future. He could sell tickets on both sides. Those who came from the Moon Nation would have to buy tickets, and those who wanted to go to the Moon Nation would also have to buy tickets. That's a good deal. Even Meg couldn't help but be impressed by his own wisdom. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.